Chapter 222. Yunshu San got up and went to the Supreme Mystery Hall. When he saw the Nine Heavens sect leader, he told him his worries. The Nine Heavens sect leader's eyes flashed. He nodded and said, "You're right. Although the Nine Heavens mountain has a formation protecting it, after we leave, the defense will be greatly weakened. If that person really has ulterior motives, he might not be able to avoid the banquet this time." Yunshu San could not hide his worry. He said, "Master, we can't take this risk." The Nine Heavens sect leader got up and ordered, "Send someone to invite the four venerables. Tell them there's something important to discuss." On the Xianji Peak, Ning Chen watched as the disciples of the main peak came up and invited Meng Xuanji to the Supreme Mystery Hall. Before Meng Xuanji left, she glanced at Ning Chen on the peak. Without saying anything, she took a step forward and disappeared. In the Qi Luo Palace, the flower venerables were teaching her new disciple the listening flower technique. After hearing the sect leader's summons, she carefully gave Yin Shuangshuang a few words before getting up and leaving. In the other two peaks, the sword venerables and the medicine venerables also went to the main peak. They were puzzled. It was so late. Why was the sect leader looking for them? In the Supreme Mystery Hall, the four venerables all arrived. Yunshu San stood respectfully at the side without saying a word. The Nine Heavens sect leader told them about the matter and asked for their opinions. The medicine venerables frowned and said, "No one would dare to refuse an invitation from the four venerables' holy lands. Even if he dares to refuse, wouldn't his identity be exposed if he does anything during the banquet?" "Not necessarily." The sword venerables shook his head and said, "That day, that person hid his aura and came. We thought that he didn't want to expose his identity. But what if he doesn't care if his identity is exposed after he gets what he wants?" "You're saying that he's from the other three sects?" asked the medicine venerables. In this world, besides the Holy Lands, only the Immortal Ascension Realm, the Cherishing Flower Palace, and the Longevity Hall had the confidence to fight against the Nine Heavens. "It's possible," answered the sword venerables. "Qi Luo, what do you think?" asked the Nine Heavens sect leader. "It's not important who he is. What we need to consider most now is his goal," said the venerables. "The Forbidden Tome of the Nine Heavens, the Separation and Reunion Pill, or the Golden Feather Centipede. Other than that, there's nothing else," Meng Xuanji said calmly. The Patriarch of the Continent of the Nine Clouds thought for a moment and said, "The Separation and Reunion Pills are kept by the Master Apothecaries, and the Forbidden Books of the Continent of the Nine Clouds are with me. You can take them with you, but the Golden Feather Lance controls the Qi of the Continent of the Nine Clouds. You can't take it out easily. It is indeed troublesome." The sword venerable nodded. At the same time, on the Xuanji Peak, Ning Chen, who had been quietly cultivating, had finally taken another step forward. He had successfully entered the second grade of the natal stage. As the spiritual energy entered his body, the three cyclones of heaven, earth, and life in his Dantian Sea of Qi expanded several times and spun rapidly. In the Supreme Mystery Hall, Meng Xuanji sensed something at the same time. She looked at the Xuanji Peak and narrowed her beautiful eyes. "What's wrong?" Venerable Flower asked softly. "I'm fine." Meng Xuanji regained her senses and replied. After another breakthrough, Ning Chen could feel the separation and reunion death seal in his body even more clearly. The shackles that Meng Xuanji had placed on him seemed to grow stronger with his cultivation. In the Supreme Mystery Hall, the five venerables had been discussing for a long time. Meng Xuanji returned after midnight and looked at Ning Chen, who was still cultivating on the peak. She stared at him seriously for a long time. She would not mistake this aura. However, she felt that something was wrong. This person did not seem to have any ulterior motives. The longevity banquet was just around the corner. Whether this person had a problem or not would be revealed very soon. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. The five venerables moved and left one after another. The Xuanji Peak became empty. After Meng Xuanji left, no one else came up. Only Ning Chen was left on the huge Xuanji peak. On the peak, Ning Chen continued to cultivate day after day. He did not care about anything else. He had already warned the 9 heavens that it would be too disappointing if someone took advantage of this opportunity to attack again. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The 9 heavens mountain was as peaceful as usual. Nothing unexpected happened. The sword venerables and the flower venerables, who were standing quietly outside the 9 heavens, did not see the person they wanted to see. They could only leave. The longevity banquet was about to begin. They could not delay it any longer. On the 4th day, everything was calm and tranquil. On the 5th day, the sun rose as usual. The disciples of the continent of the 9 heavens did the same as usual. They swept the ground, practiced sword techniques, practiced cultivation techniques, and did their own things in an orderly manner. However, at that moment, outside of the 9 heavens mountain, a rumbling sound spread in the air. The great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain started shaking violently. Everybody's expression changed drastically. Ning Chen was standing at the top of the mountain, looking at a person in black clothes in the distance. He narrowed his eyes. What was going to happen had finally happened. In front of the great deployment spell, a person in black clothes was standing there calmly. His right hand was on the great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain. A powerful qi kept shaking the deployment spell, destroying it. The person in black clothes had obviously come prepared. His blue lights were dazzling. The great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain was about to collapse. Boom! After a few breaths, the great deployment spell of the 9 heavens mountain collapsed and disappeared. The black silhouette quickly crossed the stairway of ascension and moved towards the main peak. The disciples of the continent of the 9 heavens mountain immediately formed a deployment spell. Sword lights dashed to the skies to block the intruder. The sword spell of the 9 heavens layer cultivators couldn't resist it. Everything was in vain. The person in black clothes waved his hand and blue lights spread in all directions. The disciples of the continent of the 9 heavens were blown away and crashed onto the ground like broken kites. Chang Jiangli appeared, a black and red sword in his hand. He turned into a beam of light and pierced towards the cultivator in front of him. You want to die. The dark figure snorted coldly, recognizing the sword that was rushing over. He flipped his palm and rolled up the qi of heaven and earth. The silent soul sword instantly stopped, unable to move forward. I'll spare your life for your father's sake. Move back. Li Huarong punched Chang Jiangli and pushed him back. Then, he walked towards the Supreme Mystery Temple step by step. In the distance, Ning Chen was watching the battle. He was waiting for the Zun cultivators of the continent of the 9 heavens mountain. Li Huarong entered the Supreme Mystery Temple and glanced around with his spiritual awareness. As he was about to go forwards, his expression suddenly changed. At that moment, the Supreme Mystery Peak vibrated and a powerful qi was awakened. 4 beams of golden light shot towards the intruders. Li Huarong quickly retreated, but it was too late. The 4 beams of golden light were already there. There was a loud bang and the black silhouette was blown away. Blood stained the ground. In the next moment, 4 golden silhouettes appeared and stood in the sky. They were shining like gods. Oh! On the peak, Ning Chen was surprised. His eyes flashed with admiration. If he guessed correctly, the 4 Zun cultivators had used the fortune of the continent of the 9 heavens mountain to create clones. In front of the Supreme Mystery Temple, Li Huarong steadied himself and looked at the 4 golden silhouettes in the sky. He was shocked. The 4 clones moved their feet and pressed forward. Their majestic aura surged, and even the sky and earth changed color. The golden light covered the sky. Although they were just clones, they were still very powerful. Li Huarong fought against the 4 of them alone. 3 of them attacked and 7 of them defended. He wanted to delay as much as possible. However, the four's attacks were fierce and difficult to resist. His black clothes were soon covered in blood. Wan Fengchen, what are you waiting for? Li Huarong roared with a mournful expression. Ha! There was a calm and indifferent laugh. Between heaven and earth, the wind and clouds rolled. A bright red silhouette walked out. His face was handsome, and his blood-red hair danced in the air. As soon as he appeared, the space distorted violently. The folding fan scattered and turned into a long and thin saber light. It was as red as blood and extremely beautiful. On the peak, Ning Chen's expression changed. What a powerful young man. Today, I return the favor of the temple master. As soon as he finished speaking, the rainbow saber flashed in front of everyone's eyes like lightning. The bright red silhouette stopped and the four golden clones quickly dispersed. Before the disciples on the peak could react, the blood-red saber in Wan Fengchen's hand had disappeared and turned back into a red folding fan. Li Huarong was very upset. If the temple master had not expected this and left a backup plan, he might have died here today. However, in the end, the golden feather centipedes still belonged to the immortal hall. Li Huarong walked towards the Supreme Mystery Hall again. However, at this moment, he felt a chill on his back and immediately jumped forward subconsciously. An invisible sword intent swept past silently. The white stone floor was as fragile as tofu at this moment. In the blink of an eye, a deep and bottomless gully was created. Wan Fengchen was slightly surprised. He looked at the peak in the distance and a strange look flashed in his eyes. 9 Cloud Mountain actually hid such a strong person. On the Xuanji Peak, Ning Chen waved his hand and sword qi gathered in front of him. In the blink of an eye, the sword qi swept out and once again swept towards the main peak. Li Huarong could not hide the anger on his face. He forcefully raised his body and blue light surged like waves, turning into an airtight wall of qi that blocked in front of him. Thousands of sword qi were blocked and could not move forward. It was a stalemate. A cold smile appeared on Ning Chen's face. With a point of his sword finger, an ordinary sword intent swept out. In the next moment, the sky changed color. Between heaven and earth, a terrifying sword intent appeared out of nowhere. As it moved forward, its power became more and more terrifying. In the end, it turned into a sword that could split the sky and slash down. The blue wall of qi shattered. Li Huarong's expression changed drastically. He wanted to dodge, but it was too late. The sword pierced through his body. His body, which had been heavily injured for a long time, could no longer withstand the sword. With a bang, he flew backwards, blood spurting out, spraying dozens of feet away. On the main peak, the disciples of the 9 Cloud Mountain who were lying on the ground looked at each other. The confusion in their eyes was even more intense. What had happened? Ning Chen withdrew his hand and looked at the red figure in the distance, quietly waiting for his decision. Wan Fengchen also looked in the direction of the Xuanji Peak. After a moment, the red figure dispersed and disappeared. On the Xuanji Peak, the red light flashed and Wan Fengchen walked out. Looking at the person in front of him, his eyes flashed with surprise. Second grade acquired stage, what a strange young man. I am Wan Fengchen. Ning Chen. Wan Fengchen thought for a moment and confirmed that he had never heard this name before. I'll remember it. If fate wills it, we'll meet again. Wan Fengchen nodded. In the next moment, the red figure dissipated and turned into a beam of light that flew away. Wan Fengchen. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. He also remembered this name. He was very sure that they would meet again in the future. He just did not know if the next time they met would be enemies or friends. Chapter 223. In the polar region of the western border, the wind was fierce. The visible storm swept up the sand and destroyed everything. Prince Yen walked in with Aman. The green and red swords flew out from the sword rack and circled around Aman. The sword intent turned into circles of ripples and swept away all the sand. In the wind, the black sandstorm blocked most of the view. It was hard to see what was in front of them. Prince Yen walked forward step by step, not affected by the sandstorm at all. Ah Man's pretty little face didn't show any signs of fear. She looked left and right before obediently following behind. The storm was blocked by the sword intent and couldn't enter. The small circle became the safest place in the polar region of the western border. After looking for a long time, Ah Man curiously reached out, wanting to touch the sand outside. "Don't be naughty," Prince Yen said softly. Ah Man immediately retracted her hand. She put her hands behind her back in embarrassment and continued to walk forward obediently. The two kept walking forward. After walking for a long time, the storm grew bigger and bigger. The black sand swirled in the wind, forming huge whirlpools. Clanging sounds came from the green and red swords. It was the sound caused by the sand breaking through the sword intent and hitting the swords. In the deepest part of the polar region of the western border, the storm had reached a terrifying level. Even the green and red swords were starting to struggle. In front, Prince Yen waved his hand and the Zhiga sword flew out. The three swords covered the sky and protected Ah Man. In that moment of distraction, a piece of sand brushed past Prince Yen's face. Immediately, blood dripped down and dripped onto his green robe. The horror of the sandstorm was on full display at this moment. The four polar regions of the four extremes were full of danger. Even strong cultivators of the three disasters didn't dare to enter, not to mention Ah Man, who was a burden. Prince Yen was half a step away from the three disasters. However, realms weren't absolute sometimes. Just like the sword in Barren City. Even if he hadn't reached the Khanate realm yet, every strong cultivator of the three disasters still feared him. Of course, there were very few people like him in the world. If they existed, they would be legends. On the Xuanji Peak, Ningqian didn't know that Prince Yen had brought Ah Man to this strange realm. He continued to cultivate quietly every day. The news that the main peak had been attacked was sent to the Nine Clouds sect's patriarch by a secret technique. The five venerables quickly came back from the Holy Land. When they saw the main peak that was full of holes, they didn't look good. The two disciples explained everything in detail, including Wan Feng Chen's appearance and the mysterious expert's help. In front of the Supreme Mystery Hall, Changjiang Li's gaze was fixed in the direction of the Four Stars Peak. Her intuition told her that the person who had acted that day was Ningqian of the Four Stars Peak. Li Huarong was brought out. His face was ghastly pale, and his aura was extremely weak. There was a terrifying sword wound on his left chest that pierced through his heart meridian, and half of his heart had been destroyed. If it wasn't for the strong vitality of the congenital realm, he would have died long ago. However, everyone knew that he was already crippled. The remaining sword insight on the sword mark had already destroyed Li Huarong's vitality, and it was impossible to save him. The sword venerable stepped forward and touched the sword mark on the wound. In an instant, a small wound appeared on the tip of his finger. He had been injured by the residual sword intent. What a sharp sword! The apothecary and venerable flower narrowed their eyes. Apart from the few people at the longevity banquet, they couldn't think of anyone else in the world who had such a strong sword cultivation. He's already injured to this extent. The longevity hall definitely won't let this matter rest. We have to be careful in the next few days, said the Nine Clouds sect's headmaster gravely. What exactly does the longevity hall want? Asked the apothecary, frowning. That's not important. Just be careful, said Meng Xuanji calmly. I'm going back first. With that, Meng Xuanji walked away gracefully, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Let's go as well. The venerable flower and apothecary sighed softly and also turned to leave. Perhaps this would be their last peaceful days. Facing that disaster king, the Nine Clouds sect wasn't confident that they could stop him. Meng Xuanji appeared on the Four Stars Peak. Seeing Ningqian still cultivating on the peak, her eyes flickered. A second-grade congenital realm cultivator without any concealment. Just what was going on? And that strange aura. Just what was his relationship with the Longevity Hall? Meng Xuanji thought about it for a long time, but she still couldn't figure out the reason. No matter how she thought about it, it didn't make sense. Could it really just be a coincidence? But no matter how coincidental it was, the aura of phoenix blood shouldn't appear on an ordinary person. Meng Xuanji returned to the Four Stars Hall and stopped thinking about it. In the next few days, the Disaster King might come to the Nine Clouds sect. She had to recover her cultivation to its peak as soon as possible. Days passed. The Nine Clouds sect remained silent. They didn't mention anything about what had happened a few days ago, as if nothing had happened. Li Huarong was locked in a stone room, using pills to hang on to his last breath. He couldn't wake up, but he couldn't die. Unexpectedly, the Longevity Hall also acted as if nothing had happened. They didn't care about Li Huarong's life or death. No one thought that the Longevity Hall was silent because of a guilty conscience. With that Disaster King overseeing it, that was the biggest reason. The more the Longevity Hall remained silent, the more the Nine Clouds sect master and Meng Xuanji felt that something was wrong. At that moment, a bolt from the blue came. The Immortal Ascension realm was destroyed overnight. From the sect master to the ordinary disciples, no one survived. The Yin-Yang Jade was stolen. The entire Immortal Mountain became a land of death. When the news reached the Nine Clouds, Yin Shuangshuang fainted on the spot. Everyone thought of the same person at the same time. The Disaster King. In the world, other than the leaders of the sacred grounds, only the Disaster King and the Longevity Hall had the power to destroy the entire Immortal Ascension realm overnight. However, for Immortal Ascension realm Xiantian experts, plus the Yin-Yang Jade as the core of the Four Symbols Demon Sealing Formation, should be able to fight even against the three disasters. How could they be defeated so miserably? In the Tingzhu Pavilion, Ning Chen heard the news. After thinking for a moment, he said calmly, "There's a traitor." Yun Shisan's body shook. He was immediately awakened. This was the only explanation. Yun Shisan looked at the former with a trace of doubt in his heart. Last time, it was Ning Chen's careless words that made him think of many things. This time, it was Ning Chen who reminded him again. The first time might be a coincidence, but the second time, it couldn't be a coincidence. A strange look flashed in Yun Shisan's eyes. For the first time, he had doubts about Ning Chen's identity. It's getting late. I'll go back first. Ning Chen saw the suspicion and didn't explain anything. He got up and left. He wasn't worried that Yun Shisan would think too much. Yun Shisan wasn't the only one who had doubts about him. Meng Xuanji and the woman called Chang Jiangli were also suspicious of his identity. However, suspicions were just suspicions. As long as he didn't reveal his identity, the three of them could only guess. Right now, he was more concerned about the leaders of the four extreme realms and the Disaster King. These three disasters were the source of all his worries. He had to be careful. The Disaster King of the Longevity Hall had already started to move. This wasn't good news for him. The Immortal Ascension Realm, Nine Cloud Mountain, and Cherishing Flower Palace were the greatest powers to keep the Longevity Hall in check. Now that the Immortal Ascension Realm had been destroyed, it would probably be Nine Cloud Mountain or Cherishing Flower Palace's turn next. The Disaster King clearly wanted to unify the four extreme realms and suppress all the disharmonious forces before spreading the flames of war to the Divine Continent. A war between the two realms would cause endless disasters. It was impossible for everyone to agree. The ones most likely to oppose were the Immortal Ascension Realm, Nine Cloud Mountain, and Cherishing Flower Palace. The palace master of the Cherishing Flower Palace unconsciously glanced at Ning Chen a few more times. She wanted to see what was so special about this person. Ning Chen didn't feel uncomfortable at all. He sat there quietly and drank his tea. He didn't say anything. he could look at her however he wanted. Chapter 224. Palace Mistress Xihua looked at him for a long time, but she couldn't find anything special about the young man. His talent was average, and his cultivation wasn't even worth mentioning. The only thing that was worth praising was his determination. However, in this world where strength was respected, without strength, everything was meaningless. Just like the massacre in the Immortal Ascension realm. Everyone guessed that it was the Palace of Immortality's doing, but without evidence, no one dared to say it out loud. The sacred lands were envoys, and they wouldn't listen to their side of the story. Only with enough evidence could the sacred lands intervene and punish the Palace of Immortality. The disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace were brewing tea at the side. Their young and beautiful faces were filled with curiosity. They looked at the legendary Dream Lord of the Nine Heavens, then looked at the young man who was quietly drinking tea. Ning Chen drank cup after cup of tea. He wasn't very interested in the conversation between Palace Mistress Xihua and Meng Xuanji. The only choice between the two sects was to form an alliance. Everything else was just pleasantries. The young girl who was pouring tea at the side was extremely busy. She was only 16 or 17 years old, so she didn't think too much. She only listened to her master's orders and served the guests of the Cherishing Flower Palace. The art of tea was an art that was easy to learn but not easy to master. Although the disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace were still young, their level was already not low. The tea entered his mouth. It was sweet and refreshing, and had a lingering aftertaste. It was intoxicating. Ning Chen couldn't help but think of the tea that Fan Lingyue had brewed in the pavilion where the armies of Great Xia and Northern Meng had faced each other. As he thought about it, he drank cup after cup of tea. Perhaps, he would never be able to find that taste again in this life. In the instant that Ning Chen was absent-minded, his aura unconsciously changed. Meng Xuanji and Palace Mistress Xihua looked over at the same time. There was a flash of light in their eyes. Something was wrong. Sensing their gazes, Ning Chen immediately restrained his thoughts. He regained his rationality and calmness, suppressing all his emotions at the bottom of his heart. Seeing that his aura had returned to normal, the suspicion in Meng Xuanji's eyes didn't decrease in the slightest. The feeling just now couldn't be wrong. This was definitely not the pressure that a second-grade Hotian cultivator should have. A strange look also flashed through Palace Mistress Xihua's eyes. She had misjudged him. This young man wasn't simple. Palace Mistress Xihua temporarily suppressed the idea of forming an alliance. The lesson of the Immortal Ascension realm was still fresh in her mind. She didn't want to repeat it. She trusted Meng Xuanji, but she didn't trust this young man in front of her. Venerated Dream, all of you must be tired after traveling for such a long time. Why don't you rest for the night and discuss the other matters tomorrow? Palace Master Xihua spoke with a gentle smile. Meng Xuanji could more or less guess what Palace Mistress Xihua was thinking. She stood up and said, "Thank you. Wang Yu, the two of you are responsible for properly entertaining these two honored guests. Do not neglect them." Palace Master Xihua looked to the two disciples by her side and instructed them. Yes. Two women with similar appearances walked out. Soon after, they walked in front of the two and softly said, "Please." Ning Chen put down his teacup reluctantly and followed the two disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace out of the hall. In the west wing of the Cherishing Flower Palace, because Ning Chen was a man, he was arranged to stay in a small courtyard by himself. It was quite a distance away from Meng Xuanji's residence. As night fell, Daylily brought over the flower dew that was unique to the Palace of Cherishing Flower. When she saw Ning Chen standing in front of the house in a daze, she placed the flower dew on the stone table in the courtyard. "Young Master Ning, please," Daylily said softly. "Thank you." Ning Chen came back to his senses and smiled courteously. Daylily quietly stood to the side, not saying anything as she waited for orders. Ning Chen picked up the flower dew and took a small sip before putting it down. He glanced at the quiet woman beside him and asked, "You're called Daylily?" "Yes." Daylily gently nodded in response. "It's a very good name," Ningchen said. "In my hometown, there is a type of daylily that often blooms in the mountains. Its flowers are light yellow. Every time my son travels, my mother will pick a stalk of daylily and plant it in the courtyard. She prays that my son will be safe and worry-free." Now, all that was left was regret. Ning Chen looked at the distant horizon, and a light flashed through his eyes. Was his mother in his hometown still in the courtyard, waiting for her son's return every day? Daylily quietly listened. After a long time, she softly said, "Daylily will remember what young master has said." Ning Chen came back to his senses and softly laughed. "I'm just speaking nonsense. Don't take it seriously." After saying this, Ning Chen finished the flower dew on the table and handed the cup and tray over. He said, "Thank you for your hospitality. It's already very late. You should go back and rest." Daylily took it and bowed. She didn't say anything and quietly left. The bright moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling down a cold waterfall. The figure in the courtyard quietly stood there, not moving at all. From afar, it was so abrupt. Even though it was standing in this world, it still seemed out of place. Inside Meng Xuanji's room, Palace Mistress Xihua had been sitting there for a long time. No one knew what they were talking about. However, before leaving, Palace Mistress Xihua reminded her that young man called Ning Chen is not simple. "You have to be careful." "I know." Meng Xuanji nodded. After Palace Mistress Xihua left, Meng Xuanji walked out of her room and looked at Ning Chen's small courtyard. When she swept her spiritual sense over it, she was suddenly stunned. The courtyard in the west wing was empty. There was not a single person in it. Meng Xuanji's figure flashed and she arrived in Ning Chen's courtyard. She looked around and narrowed her eyes. In the night, a white figure streaked across the night sky, heading north. This was the first time Ning Chen had used his full strength after entering the Xiantian realm. Everything in the world disappeared behind him in the blink of an eye. Northern region, Immortal Ascension Realm. The entire mountain peak was filled with scars from a great battle. Blood dyed the mountain peak red. Even from far away, one could smell the pungent smell of blood. Ning Chen appeared at the foot of the mountain. He didn't stop. With a step, he disappeared. At the top of the mountain peak, a red figure stood there quietly. He looked around at the miserable state of the surroundings. After a long time, he sighed. As the white light flashed, Ning Chen stopped and frowned slightly. It was him. He hadn't expected them to meet so quickly. Wan Fengchen turned around. When he saw the young man in front of him, surprise flashed through his eyes. "It's you. This world is really too small." Ning Chen sighed. "Do you want to fight?" Wan Fengchen asked softly. The red folding fan in his hand turned into a thin, blood-red blade. "I'm not in the mood to fight." Ning Chen shook his head. "Ha!" Wan Fengchen chuckled. With a wave of his hand, the blade turned back into a red folding fan. "I've heard rumors about you. But with your strength, Dream Sovereign's incomplete separation death seal shouldn't be able to control you. Why are you still on the Jade Pearl Peak?" asked Wan Fengchen curiously. "I don't have anywhere to go." "It doesn't matter where I go," said Ning Chen indifferently. Ning Chen looked at the red-robed young man and asked, "I've also heard rumors about you. I heard you once challenged the palace master of the Longevity Hall. What happened?" "I lost. I lost very miserably. I almost died in the Longevity Hall." Wan Fengchen didn't try to hide anything, and he lightly smiled. "However, the Disaster King stopped after the last attack, so I owed him a favor. It wasn't until a few days ago that I repaid that favor on the Tai Xian Peak." "Right, why did you come here?" "Do you know anyone here?" asked Wan Fengchen. Ning Chen shook his head. No, I just came to take a look. Did you see anything? Asked Wan Fengchen. The longevity hall is stronger than I thought, sighed Ning Chen. There were at least 10 different Xiantian realm auras here, and there were only 4 Xiantian realm cultivators. In other words, the longevity hall had sent out at least 6 Xiantian realm cultivators. Wan Fengchen looked at the miserable situation below the peak. After a moment of silence, he said, "The sacred land will deal with this." Ning Chen laughed mockingly. "This isn't the first time I've heard this. You all seem to believe in the sacred land." Yunshi San and Little Stone had both said the same thing. If you didn't know that the master of the 4 extreme realms and the disaster king had already secretly colluded to conquer the divine continent, he might have believed them too. Wan Fengchen turned his head and looked at the person beside him. He couldn't help but frown. "Why do you have such a strong opinion of the sacred land?" "Nothing. It's getting late. I'm going back. See you later." With that, Ning Chen took a step forward and turned into a streak of white light. Wan Fengchen looked at the departing figure. His eyes flashed. He hadn't seen wrong. This person didn't have a good impression of the sacred land. A cold wind blew past. On the peak of the mountain, the red clothes scattered and disappeared. He hadn't returned for many years. This time, the sacred land's emissary had come. He needed to meet him and ask him how the sacred land was going to deal with the immortal Ascension realm. Ning Chen returned to the west wing of the Cherishing Flower Palace. As soon as he walked into the courtyard, he saw Meng Xuanji quietly waiting there. Her beautiful face was cold. "May I ask where you went last night?" Meng Xuanji asked coldly. "I couldn't sleep, so I took a walk," Ning Chen replied calmly. Meng Xuanji's eyes grew colder. Just as she was about to speak, she heard soft footsteps outside the courtyard. "Lord Meng, Lord Ning, the palace master invites you." Wang Yu walked over and bowed respectfully to Meng Xuanji. Meng Xuanji could only take back her words and walk out of the courtyard. Ning Chen followed. When he passed by Wang Yu, he said softly, "Thank you." Wang Yu smiled gently. Her smile was very faint. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it. Palace Master Xihua was already waiting in the Azure Flower Palace. When she saw the 3 of them arrive, she frowned. "Wang Yu, I only asked you to pass on a message. Why did you take so long?" "Please forgive me, Palace Master. It's my fault." Wang Yu stepped forward and softly apologized. "Don't do it again. You can leave." Palace Master Xihua clearly didn't want to blame Wang Yu too much. Wang Yu bowed, then turned around and smiled at Ning Chen. She then left the palace. "Meng Xuanji, let's talk about the alliance between the Cherishing Flower Palace and 9 Firmament Mountain," said Palace Master Xihua. "I'm all ears," said Meng Xuanji calmly. To the side, Ning Chen's lips curled into a cold smile. It seemed that he had been treated as a fool. Even the act was in front of him. Chapter 225. Inside the Azure Flower Palace, Meng Xuanji and Palace Mistress Xihua were discussing the matter of forming an alliance, as well as how they would deal with the Palace of Longevity in the future. When Ning Chen heard these words from the side, he didn't believe a single word. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. A golden streak of light tore through the sky and arrived at the Azure Flower Palace. "Revered dream, return quickly." Meng Xuanji and Palace Mistress Xihua's expressions changed. Even Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. Something had happened. Due to the urgency of the matter, Meng Xuanji didn't have time to say anything. She took a step forward and disappeared. "Wang Yu, bring our honored guest to rest," Palace Mistress Xihua stood up and ordered. "Yes." Forgotten Sorrow walked over and respectfully said, "Young master, please." Ning Chen didn't say anything. He turned around and walked out of the hall. In the west wing, after Worryless brought Ning Chen in, she stood quietly at the side, waiting for orders. Ning Chen looked in the direction of Nine Cloud Mountain. His eyes flickered. If he guessed correctly, the Longevity Hall had made a move against Nine Cloud Mountain. There were 4 Xiantian cultivators in the Nine Clouds. Unless it was the Longevity Hall, they wouldn't be in such a hurry to summon Meng Xuanji back. He hadn't expected the Longevity Hall to strike again so soon. After the Immortal Ascension Stage incident, all the sects were on guard against the Longevity Hall. Moreover, the 4 extreme Holy Lands had already sent out an envoy to investigate this matter. Regardless of what agreement the Masters of the 4 Extremities and the Master of the Longevity Hall had secretly reached, the 4 Extremities' sacred grounds had always maintained a holy and just position in the 4 Extremities' sacred grounds. On the surface, the Longevity Hall's actions were undoubtedly a challenge to the dignity of the sacred grounds. Worry flashed across Ning Chen's eyes. Now, the Holy Land and the Longevity Hall were one in the light and one in the dark. Be it in terms of reputation or absolute strength, they were not something that the other major sects could contend against. It was not impossible for the 4 extremes to unite. The most troublesome thing was that the sects of the 4 extremities did not know about the ambitions of the hallowed grounds and the Longevity Hall. At the side, Daylily handed him a cup of tea and said softly, "If young master is worried, you can go back and take a look." Ning Chen took the teacup and his body trembled. He looked at the former in disbelief. How could this be? After a short period of shock, Ning Chen truly looked at Daylily for the first time. All this time, he had not paid much attention to this gentle and quiet woman beside him. Now, it seemed that he had misjudged her. "Miss Worryless, please keep this a secret." Ning Chen's expression was solemn as he pleaded. "Young master, please come back quickly." Daylily smiled gently and said softly. Ning Chen nodded. Then, his feet moved, and he quickly disappeared into the distance. Daylily turned around and tidied up the teacups and empty plates on the stone table. Then, she quietly left the courtyard. At the Nine Clouds Mountain, 1 person appeared and 3 inborn experts appeared. The entire Nine Clouds Mountain was on high alert. Inside the flowing light armor, a pair of emotionless eyes stared at the 4 inborn experts in front of him without any emotion. In the depths of the Nine Heavens Mountain, the gilded feather centipede shone brightly, ready to fly out at any moment. The 4 Zun masters of the continent of the Nine Clouds looked more serious than ever. If they couldn't stop him, it would be a real disaster. I'll say it again. Hand over the golden feather tail, and I'll spare you this time, the Disaster King said indifferently. Impossible, said the Nine Firmaments sect leader. Impossibly stupid. The Disaster King coldly snorted and raised his right palm. In an instant, the wind and clouds changed color. Thunder rumbled as dark clouds covered the sky. It was an extremely frightening sight. Swish! In the depths of Nine Clouds Mountain, a golden beam of light slashed down. It pierced through space and arrived in front of the Disaster King. An enormous rumbling sound rang out. The world's sharpest weapon faced off against an expert who transcended the 5 tribulations, a heaven-shocking strike that completely shattered space. The Disaster King waved his hand, scattering the shockwaves. The flowing light armor shone brightly. It wasn't damaged at all. The 4 inborn experts' expressions were extremely ugly. Could it be that the Nine Clouds Mountain really was doomed this time? The Disaster King walked forward step by step. His divine might was unrivaled. At this moment, multicolored light condensed in the sky. A peerless figure walked out. Her slender hand slapped out. The Disaster King also flipped his palm. With a bang, the ground beneath them cracked. Meng Xuanji, as expected, you've already passed the 5th tribulation, said the Disaster King. Are you very surprised? Asked Meng Xuanji coldly. I'm a bit surprised, but that's all, said the Disaster King indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, the Disaster King waved his right hand. Thunder rumbled in the sky as an ancient mirror carved with complex runes slowly appeared. Green light lingered around it and sprinkled down, shocking the minds of everyone present. Reincarnation mirror. The 9 Clouds sect's leader, Sword Zune, and the others' hearts sank. They hadn't thought the Disaster King would even bring out the reincarnation mirror. It seemed he was determined to destroy the 9 Clouds mountain. Stop! The space between them stirred as a purple-robed middle-aged man appeared. He held a 4-colored token in his hand as he stood in front of them. Everyone present was a true leader of a sect. They naturally recognized the talisman in the purple-robed middle-aged man's hand. The Holy Land's emissary had finally arrived. Disaster King, you're overstepping your boundaries, shouted the purple-robed middle-aged man. The Disaster King remained unmoved. Today, even if the Holy Land intervenes, it won't change the fate of the 9 Clouds mountain. Is that so? What if you add me in? A red light flashed, and a red-robed figure appeared. His blood-red hair fluttered in the wind. A bright red saber light appeared. It was so dazzling that people didn't dare look directly at it. The Disaster King narrowed his eyes. Wan Feng Chen, don't think that just because you survived once, you can survive a second time. I can try, replied Wan Feng Chen seriously. Palace Master, there's a change in the longevity pool. At that moment, a silhouette appeared. The Disaster King's expression changed slightly. Retreat. The 3 Xiantian cultivators who hadn't come out the entire time quickly retreated. Meng Xuanji's eyes flashed coldly. The Long Life Temple had already shed all pretense of cordiality. If nothing unexpected happened, they would come back very quickly. Many thanks, Holy Emissary, said the Continent of the 9 Clouds headmaster politely. The 4 Extreme Holy Emissary shook his head. It's my duty. I wouldn't have thought that the Disaster King would be so arrogant. He even dares ignore the Holy Land's orders. Wan Feng Chen didn't wait for the Sword Saint and the others to thank him before disappearing. Outside of the Continent of the 9 Clouds, Ning Chen was calmly standing on a cliff. He looked at the 4 Extreme Holy Emissary in front of the Supreme Mystery Temple. The Holy Land had finally intervened. He wanted to see how the 4 Extreme Holy Emissary and the Long Life Temple would continue acting. After a long time, Ning Chen left, and the cliff became calm again. There was no one else there. Ning Chen appeared in the western wing of the Cherishing Flower Palace. Not long after, Worryless walked over with a cup of flower dew. She gently placed it on the stone table. Sir, please. Many thanks. Ning Chen raised the cup and drank a mouthful. He looked at the woman in front of him and asked, Miss Worryless, can you tell me how you saw through it? He could tell that Worryless' cultivation was only at the 6th rank. In this era where geniuses were everywhere, she really couldn't be considered outstanding. However, this seemingly ordinary and gentle woman had greatly shocked him. Worryless smiled faintly. She didn't say anything and just stood there quietly. Her body quickly merged with heaven and earth, as if she would disappear at any moment. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched. A Dao physique. There really was such a physique in the world. Originally, he had thought that the Ghost Woman and Underworld Child's ghost physique and Underworld physique were already ridiculous enough. He hadn't thought that there would be a Dao physique. Since when had these rare physiques become so common? The biggest difference between innate and acquired was the ability to use the energy of heaven and earth. However, the Dao physique was an exception. Those who possessed the Dao physique were born with a strong affinity for the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Their cultivation and realm were never directly proportional. In other words, this gentle and quiet woman before him might be in existence with abnormally terrifying combat strength. Excuse me. Ning Chen stood up and smiled bitterly. Fortunately, he hadn't offended this woman. Otherwise, he would be in deep trouble. Sir, you're too polite. Worryless still had a calm smile on her face as she replied. A thought suddenly flashed through Ning Chen's mind. He asked with a strange expression, Miss Worryless wouldn't also have a Dao physique, right? The two of them looked very similar. They were obviously sisters. If another Dao physique appeared, he would really want to bang his head against a wall. Worryless shook her head lightly and said, no. Only then did Ning Chen breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, there were still more ordinary people like him in the world. Sir, please rest. Worryless will leave first. Worryless tidied up the cup on the stone table and bowed gracefully. Then, she walked out of the courtyard. Ning Chen breathed a sigh of relief again. If possible, he really didn't want to face someone who possessed the Dao physique. From a certain point of view, the Dao physique was the most terrifying physique in the world. Even though it wasn't like the ghost physique or the underworld physique, which had an undying body, the Dao physique's ability to sense the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was too frightening. When it attacked, it was like fighting against heaven and earth. It was truly not something a human could do. He had managed to hide the fact that he had already stepped into the Xiantian realm from Meng Xuanji, Honorable Sword, Palace Mistress Cherishing Flower, and the others. However, Worryless had seen through it with a single glance. One could imagine just how frightening the affinity a Dao physique had with heaven and earth. Perhaps this was a good thing. With an additional Dao physique, the Cherishing Flower Palace would become stronger. If the Palace of Immortality came, they would also encounter quite a bit of trouble. However, the prerequisite for all of this was that the Cherishing Flower Palace was against starting a war between the two realms. Otherwise, the existence of the Dao physique would instead be a terrifying threat to the divine continent. Right now, the greatest variable was the Four Extremes sacred ground. The Palace of Immortality's strength made these large sects somewhat fearful. As the only sect that could contend against or even punish the Palace of Immortality, the Four Extremes sacred ground was bound to become the leader that everyone expected. He still couldn't tell whether the master of the Four Extremes sacred ground and the Disaster King were planning to use force to unify the Four Extremes sacred ground or use the Palace of Immortality's calamity to force the large sects to submit to the sacred ground. Both methods had their pros and cons. The former would allow the Four Extremes sacred ground to unify completely, and there would be no other voices. However, it would also consume a lot of power. Although the latter method would preserve the strength of the Four Extremes sacred ground to the greatest extent, when the war between the two realms began in the future, it was unknown how many large sects would continue to listen to the sacred ground's commands. Chapter 226. In the next few days, Meng Xuanji seemed to have forgotten about Ning Chen. She left him alone in the Cherishing Flower Palace, not caring about him at all. Palace Mistress Cherishing Flower also treated him well, not neglecting him in the slightest. Ning Chen wasn't in a hurry to return. It was just that every time he faced Daylily, he felt a bit strange. Palace Mistress Cherishing Flower clearly didn't know about this. Otherwise, she wouldn't have let a person who didn't even want to face a Xiantian expert come to treat him. Daylily, on the other hand, was very natural. There wasn't anything different about her at all. She was still very quiet as usual. When she spoke, she also gave off a gentle and quiet feeling. Ning Chen adapted for 2 days, and the strange feeling in his heart lessened a bit. He could finally calm down when facing Daylily. Wang Yu would also come over from time to time. However, the name Wang Yu clearly didn't fit her actual name. Compared to Daylily's quiet personality, Wang Yu was the kind of person who would chatter endlessly once they got to know each other. Ning Chen was often annoyed by her, but he didn't dare to say anything harsh due to Daylily's presence. Daylily doted on her little sister very much. Most of the time, she just stood quietly to the side and watched with a faint smile on her face. She didn't say anything. Ning Chen, is venerated Dream fierce to you? Not fierce. Is she good to you? She's all right. Then why did you refuse to take her as your master back then? That's none of your business, Ning Chen was so annoyed that he almost said the last two words. However, when he saw Daylily smiling to the side, he swallowed them back down and changed his words. Actually, I want to enter the Cherishing Flower Palace. The Cherishing Flower Palace doesn't accept male disciples, Wang Yu said regretfully. Ning Chen faked a laugh. He had already been a eunuch once. He had no interest in disguising himself as a woman and sneaking into the Cherishing Flower Palace. Wang Yu, Sir Ning needs to rest. Let's leave, Wang Yu, who had been silent all this time, said softly. Oh. Wang Yu reluctantly agreed and followed her out of the small courtyard. Ning Chen's smile disappeared. He took a step forward and disappeared. Daylily turned around to look. A faint smile flashed across her gentle and beautiful face. Then, she continued walking forward. Outside the 9-cloud mountain, Ning Chen appeared on a high peak. He was still patiently waiting for the 4 extreme saint to appear. The moon was shining brightly in the sky. In the distance, the 9 clouds mountain was peaceful. The arrival of the envoy gave the continent of the 9 clouds some confidence. Most people still believed that even if the Hall of Immortality had a calamity king that exceeded the 5th tribulation realm, they definitely wouldn't dare be too impudent in the face of the Holy Land's interference. Ning Chen waited for 6 days. He would come every night without the slightest bit of impatience. Finally, the person who was supposed to appear appeared. When half of the night had passed, the purple-clothed 4 extreme holy emissary appeared beyond the 9 heavens, heading east. On the mountain peak, Ning Chen moved his feet and followed. 300 miles to the west of the 9 heavens mountain, the 4 extreme saint emissary stopped and waited quietly. Not long after, an illusory figure walked out. The two of them chatted for a while before they left. The 4 extreme saint emissaries didn't delay at all. They quickly returned in the direction of 9 heavens mountain. However, right when he was halfway there, a plain-clothed figure appeared out of thin air and obstructed his path. The 4 extreme saint emissaries' brows turned cold. He suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and said in a deep voice, "Young man, you've come to the wrong place." "That's right. I've been waiting for you for a long time," said Ning Chen calmly. Without further ado, Ning Chen's body instantly disappeared. Wind and clouds gathered as his sword tore through the air. Boom! The sword and palm collided, causing space to explode. This was the beginning of a life-and-death battle. The intense battle stirred up sand for thousands of feet. Rocks crumbled as they were destroyed by the terrifying shockwaves. The 4 extreme saint emissary was shocked. He found it hard to believe that the young man in front of him was so powerful. Ning Chen condensed a sword with his finger. The surrounding heaven and earth spiritual energy swirled as he clashed with the 4 extreme saint emissary. Not long after, the corners of their mouths were dyed red. Ning Chen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His expression was cold. With his current cultivation level, fighting was indeed more strenuous than he had imagined. The 4 extreme saint emissaries' expression was abnormally heavy. He really couldn't figure out who the young man in front of him was. He was clearly only a second-stage postnatal expert, but he was shockingly powerful. In terms of control over the heaven and earth powers, he was even at a disadvantage. Retreat. The 4 extreme saint emissary made a prompt decision and quickly retreated. "You think you can leave?" Ning Chen snorted coldly. His figure flashed as he turned into a streak of light and chased after the 4 extreme saint emissary. With a loud bang, the 4 extreme saint emissary retreated a dozen steps. A terrifying sword wound appeared on the right side of his chest. It was so deep that his bones could be seen. "You've gone too far." The 4 extreme saint emissary was enraged. He raised his hand, and the heaven and earth powers gathered around him. He roared fiercely. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. He stomped his foot, and a dark yellow light rose around him. The ground suddenly trembled, and cracks appeared. Earth Scroll, 1,000 Earth revolutions. The ground shook violently, causing the 4 extreme Saint Emissary to lose his footing. In an instant, the ground split apart and rose up before quickly closing in the middle. With a loud bang, the 4 extreme Saint Emissary was submerged in the ground and disappeared without a trace. The Earth Scroll revealed the 4 extreme realms for the first time. Its terrifying divine might shook the world. A moment later, a furious roar came from the ground. The 4 extreme Saint Emissary rushed out of his restraints. His hair was dyed red, and he was in a sorry state. Ningchen jumped into the air, and with a flip of his right hand, he slammed the 4 extreme Saint Emissary into the ground once more. In the next moment, Ningchen took a step and disappeared. He arrived in front of the 4 extreme Saint Emissary and stomped down, instantly shattering his meridians. The 4 extreme Saint Emissary was unable to bear the pain. His eyes widened, and he fainted. Ningchen walked up and groped around for a bit before picking him up. His figure flickered, and he disappeared into the night. The Cherishing Flower Palace's western wing. When Ningchen returned, the sky was already bright. Fortunately, other than Worryless, who was in charge of serving tea, there were very few people in the western wing. Of course, there was also Worryless, who chattered all day. Once the sun rose, Worryless walked over with a basin of water for washing his face. There was a white towel hanging from the basin. "Young master, please," said Worryless softly. Ningchen revealed a helpless expression. Even after so many days, he still felt a bit awkward. "Miss Worryless, I can do these things myself." Ningchen bitterly smiled. Having someone with a Xiantian-level Dao physique serve him tea really was a bit strange. Worryless didn't say anything. She had a gentle smile on her face as she quietly stood to the side. "Ningchen." Just at this moment, a clear voice rang out, breaking the deadlock. "I'm washing my face." Ningchen replied exasperatedly. He went up and washed his face with water. Why were these two sisters' personalities so different? The only thing they had in common was that one was more difficult to provoke than the other. After Ningchen finished washing his face, Worryless walked up to the basin and out of the room. At the door, Worryless giggled when she saw Worryless. She then skipped into the room. "Ningchen, let's have a competition today," said Worryless excitedly. "You have the nerve to say that," said Ningchen exasperatedly. Just what was this girl thinking? A 7th-rank martial artist fighting a 2nd-rank martial artist. Even he felt embarrassed for her. "I will suppress my cultivation base. I definitely won't bully you." Worryless patted her chest confidently. "No, I'm not interested." Ningchen refused without the slightest hesitation. "Let's go. Let's have a competition." Worryless directly grabbed him and forcefully dragged him out. "Men and women shouldn't touch each other. You're a girl, so you should be more reserved." Ningchen couldn't resist, but he couldn't resist either. "I know." Worryless agreed. However, she didn't seem to have any intention of letting go. She used all her strength to drag him out. After a few moments of deadlock, Ningchen was dragged away. When he was about to leave the courtyard, he saw Worryless. He immediately acted as if he had seen his savior. Unfortunately, Worryless only smiled as usual. She didn't say anything, nor did she stop him. The two of them quickly arrived at the Cherishing Flower Palace's practice field. There were many Cherishing Flower Palace disciples practicing their swordsmanship. When they saw an unfamiliar man appear, they couldn't help but glance over curiously. Worryless quietly followed behind him. Only when they arrived did she softly say, "Go easy on him." "Don't worry, I'll do my best to go easy on him," said Worryless very confidently. Ningchen smiled helplessly and nodded without leaving a trace. Seeing that someone was about to compete, the Cherishing Flower Palace disciples immediately scattered, opening up a large space for the two of them. "What weapon will you use?" Worryless swung the whip in her hand and smiled. Ningchen glanced at the weapons on the rack. He took 2 steps forward and pulled out a wooden sword. He said, "I'll use this." Worryless didn't feel that Ning Chen was underestimating her. They were just sparring in the first place. "Be careful." Worryless swung the whip in her hand. In the blink of an eye, the whip coiled like a snake as it swept towards Ning Chen. The disciples of the Cherishing Flower Palace all watched the battle nervously. Although they could see that Wang Yu was being lenient and had only used less than 10% of her cultivation, the young man in front of them was really too weak. No one could tell how many attacks he could take. Ning Chen raised his wooden sword and pointed it 3 feet away from the long whip in front of him. Instantly, the power of the long whip within 3 feet was completely neutralized. Taking advantage of this gap, he brushed past the long whip and moved forward. Using the wooden sword, he slapped Forgotten Word's hand. "Ah!" Worryless cried out in pain. Her hand unconsciously loosened, and the whip fell to the ground. Ning Chen put away his sword. The gloominess that had been bothering him for the past few days immediately dissipated. Seeing that Worryless still hadn't reacted, he really wanted to say that he had tolerated her for a very long time. However, Worryless was still beside him, so he magnanimously endured it. The Cherishing Flower Palace disciples all looked at each other. They clearly didn't understand what was going on. "It doesn't count. I wasn't prepared just now. Let's do it again." Worryless came back to her senses and rubbed her red hands. Ning Chen was just about to say something when he suddenly sensed a familiar aura. He immediately calmed himself down and placed the wooden sword back on the rack. "Worryless, come here," said Worryless softly from the side. Worryless didn't understand what was going on, but she still obediently walked over. "Young Master Ning, we'll meet again if fate wills it." Worryless brought Worryless forward. She gently smiled and said goodbye. Chapter 227. Meng Xuanji was here to bring Ning Chen back. In the Azure Flower Hall, Wang Yu stood quietly to the side. However, Wang Yu's eyes were clearly filled with reluctance. Meng Xuanji and Palace Master Xihua exchanged a few words before leaving with Ning Chen. Wang Yu's eyes reddened as she watched the two of them leave. A little girl's feelings always came and went quickly. After playing around these past few days, in Wang Yu's heart, Ning Chen had already become a very good friend. The daylily was still as tranquil as before. The smile on her face was faintly discernible and faint, making it difficult for others to see it clearly. After Ning Chen returned to the Listening Bamboo Pavilion, the first thing he did was to visit Yunshi-san. After a few days, Ning Chen noticed some subtle changes in Yunshi-san's body. Yunshi-san's cultivation had improved by half a step and could enter the Xiantian realm anytime. However, there was a trace of worry on Yunshi-san's face as if he was worried about something. Little Shirtu was also present. Ning Chen patted the little fellow's bun and asked, "What happened to your master?" Little Shirtu was affected by Yunshi-san, so his mood wasn't high either. He said in a low voice, "The Holy Land's emissary left Nine Heavens Mountain at some point last night and hasn't returned yet." Ning Chen nodded and said softly, "Don't worry. The sacred envoy is an innate expert. Nothing will happen to him. Perhaps he had something urgent to attend to and didn't have time to inform the sect leader." Little Shirtu responded and quickly regained his good mood. He went out to play without a care in the world. "Are you worried that the Longevity Hall will come again?" Ning Chen looked at Yunshi-san and asked. "Yes." Yunshi-san sighed and said, "Once the sacred envoy leaves, the Calamity King and the Immortal Hall receive the news, they will no longer have any scruples and will make a comeback. Dream Supremacy and the Cherishing Flower Palace have already discussed the matter of forming an alliance. As long as the two sects form an alliance, the Palace of Immortality will most likely not dare to act rashly," Ning Chen consoled. "I hope so," Yunshi-san said helplessly. Ning Chen smiled. After a few more words of comfort, he left the bamboo listening pavilion and walked towards the Jade Pearl Peak. On the Xuanji Peak, Meng Xuanji stood on the peak and looked into the distance. Her beautiful eyes flashed continuously. Ning Qin didn't disturb him. He walked to the other side and cultivated quietly. As the sun set and the moon rose, the night gradually turned cold. Meng Xuanji still stood there quietly, not moving an inch. Boom! At that moment, an earth-shattering explosion sounded. 6 powerful figures appeared outside the great deployment of the 9 clouds. The 6 of them joined forces and destroyed the great deployment of the 9 clouds. The patriarch of the continent of the 9 clouds and the 3 other Zun masters immediately sensed something. They walked out of the palace and went to the top of the mountain. Palace master, come quickly. On the Xuanji Peak, Meng Xuanji flipped her hands and formed complicated seals as she transmitted her voiceover. At the same time, Empress Xihua sensed something. Her figure flashed, and she left the Azure Flower Palace. However, right when Palace Master Xihua was about to move, a figure clad in flowing light armor appeared and blocked her path. Palace Master, you won't be able to go anywhere tonight. Calamity King. Empress Xihua's expression changed. How could this be? Shouldn't the Disaster King be at 9 Cloud Mountain? If the Long Life Hall didn't have the King of Calamities, how could they conquer the 9 firmaments? At this moment, countless thoughts flashed through Palace Master Xihua's mind. However, she was unable to figure out what had gone wrong. On the Xuanji Peak, Meng Xuanji watched as the 6 of them attacked the main peak. Confusion flashed across her eyes. Why hadn't the Disaster King appeared yet? In the depths of the Taishan Peak, golden light rose up. The golden feather centipede floated up and down, releasing terrifying rays of light. Among the 6 of them, one of them held the reincarnation mirror and suppressed the golden feather centipede. The other 5 attacked together, forcing the 4 venerables into a dangerous situation. Meng Xuanji waited for a long time, but the Disaster King still didn't appear. She lightly stepped onto the battlefield. The azure-robed expert with the reincarnation mirror faced Meng Xuanji. The 2 of them joined the battle. The battle instantly became intense. Ning Qin watched the intense battle on the main peak. He didn't look worried at all. The Disaster King hadn't appeared because he had expected the 9 Cloud Mountain and the Cherishing Flower Palace to form an alliance. He was most likely blocking the Cherishing Flower Palace's experts. However, the Disaster King had miscalculated. The 4 holy emissaries he had placed his hopes on had already been crippled by him. They weren't of any use. With only 6 Xiantian experts, they wanted to attack 9 Cloud Mountain. Hopefully, the Long Life Palace could afford that price. The battle on the main peak was becoming more and more intense. The azure-robed expert facing Meng Xuanji was finding it more and more difficult to fight. Before long, he was heavily injured. Without the suppression of the reincarnation mirror, the golden feather centipede was able to display its might once more. With the 4 venerables working together, the battle showed signs of turning around. The unexpected change didn't appear. The 6 of them became more and more shocked as they fought. They didn't understand what was going on. Meng Xuanji sent the azure-robed expert flying with a palm. Her figure flashed, and she entered the golden feather centipede's golden light. Her cultivation technique rapidly soared, and golden light filled the sky. It was like a golden sun had risen, illuminating the Taishan Peak. The power of the 5th Xiantian tribulation was fully displayed at this moment. Adding on the golden feather centipede's karmic luck, it was infinitely close to the legendary 3 disaster realm. The 5 of them were immediately pierced by the golden light. Only the azure-robed expert with the reincarnation mirror managed to avoid this calamity. Retreat! Ordered the azure-robed expert, suppressing the roiling blood qi in his body. You want to leave? It's not that easy. Meng Xuanji's palm descended, and the 6 of them were sent flying. The 3 with weaker cultivation bases were finally unable to endure and crashed into the ground. Buzz! At the critical moment, the reincarnation mirror revealed a power that wasn't inferior to the golden feather centipedes. The azure-robed expert and the other two barely managed to block this palm and quickly escaped. Meng Xuanji landed on the ground, her face pale. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Obviously, her body had suffered a great burden from forcefully controlling the golden feather centipede to fight against the 6 of them. Sect Master, I'll leave this place to you. Meng Xuanji instructed. Her figure flashed, and she quickly flew towards the Xuanji Peak. Meng Xuanji appeared on the Xuanji Peak. Seeing Ning Chen still cultivating on the peak, her eyes flashed. However, she was injured and didn't have time to think. She quickly walked into the Xuanji Hall. Seeing Meng Xuanji enter the hall to treat her injuries, Ning Chen's figure flashed and disappeared. Outside the 9-Cloud Mountain, the azure-robed expert and the other 2 Xiantian experts of the Eternal Life Hall hurried towards the Eternal Life Hall. Ning Chen followed them for a while, but the 3 of them were escaping too quickly. Soon, they were out of sight. Not long after, Ning Chen returned. Looking at the Xuanji Hall, his eyes flashed coldly. From today's battle, Meng Xuanji should not be far from the 3 calamities. He had to make a decision quickly. Once a 3rd expert of the 3 calamities appeared in the 4 extremities realm, it would be the worst news for the divine land. The master of the 4 extremities realm and the king of disasters were trying their best to find a 3rd expert of the 3 calamities realm to break through the boundary between the 2 realms. If Meng Xuanji could enter the 3 calamities realm, the 2 of them wouldn't have to give up on what was close at hand. They just needed to find a way to get Meng Xuanji to fight once. In the Xuanji Palace, Meng Xuanji, who was still recuperating, suddenly opened her eyes. She looked at the young figure outside the palace and a look of shock flashed across her eyes. Just now, she had sensed a faint murderous aura. This was the first time. Why? Could it be that he was related to the Eternal Life Hall? Ugh! In that moment of distraction, Meng Xuanji groaned and vomited a mouthful of blood. Her aura became extremely unstable. Outside the Xuanji Hall, Ning Chen felt the chaotic aura inside the hall. He walked forward step by step. Looking at the beautiful figure who was forcefully circulating her energy to suppress her injuries, he raised his right hand. Immediately, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth stirred and gathered crazily from all directions, forming a terrifying sword intent. You want to kill me? Meng Xuanji coughed out a mouthful of blood and said hoarsely. Ning Chen shook his head and said coldly, Are you still hesitating? Why? Meng Xuanji tried to stall for time while trying to activate the separation death seal. However, all resistance was futile. Ning Chen would not make such a mistake. Otherwise, he would have died more than 100 times. Don't waste your energy. The separation death seal was already destroyed before I came in, said Ning Chen calmly to Meng Xuanji. Why? Meng Xuanji asked coldly, Did you sneak into the 9 Heavens mountain to kill me? Ning Chen shook his head again and said, No, the idea of killing you was just a spur of the moment. However, if I can destroy a part of your body and prevent you from stepping into the 3 disasters realm, it might be a better idea. You're from the Palace of Immortals. Meng Xuanji said slowly as she tried her best to suppress her injuries. At that moment, Ning Chen's figure flashed past and pointed at Meng Xuanji. A sword formed from snowflakes pierced through her body. The vital energy that she had just gathered shattered once again. I advise you not to think about getting lucky. Ning Chen released his right hand and looked at the snow-colored sword that was dyed red with blood. He said indifferently, As for your question, I can tell you with certainty that I have nothing to do with the Palace of Immortals. At that moment, Ning Chen's doubts had been answered. So the reason Meng Xuanji was wary of him was because she suspected that he was sent by the Palace of Immortals. However, this was not important to him. A strange light flashed through Meng Xuanji's eyes. If he wasn't from the Palace of Immortals, then why did he have the aura of phoenix blood? Also, why did he want to kill her? I'll give you one last chance. Whether or not you can keep this part of your body depends on your answer, Ning Chen said very seriously. If one day, the master of the four extremes asks you and the disaster king to work together to open a path to another realm, what will you do? After saying this, Ning Chen quietly stood in front of Meng Xuanji. His eyes flashed coldly. To be honest, he didn't want to hear any other answer. However, if Meng Xuanji made the wrong choice, he would not show mercy. Hearing this strange question, Meng Xuanji fell silent. After a long while, she said, "No matter when, I will never work together with the disaster king." Ning Chen looked at Meng Xuanji and slowly said, "How can I believe you?" Meng Xuanji snorted and said indifferently, "If you don't believe me, you can attack." Ning Chen didn't ask any more questions. He stepped forward and pulled out the blood-dyed sword. With a wave of his hand, it disappeared. "I hope that in the future, you'll still remember what you said today." With that, Ning Chen turned and left. The Palace of Immortals had been heavily injured this time. They would not be able to deal with the 9 firmaments and the Cherishing Flower Palace in a short period of time. There was no need for him to stay. Chapter 228. Ning Chen walked out of the Xuanji Palace. 2 steps later, his clothes scattered and he disappeared. The human dynasty was bustling with people. It was a bustling scene. Qingli City was the capital of the Lihua dynasty closest to the four extremes sacred grounds. Ning Chen walked quietly among the people, looking no different from an ordinary person. As one of the 4 dynasties of the four extremes realm, the Lihua dynasty relied on the sacred grounds to exist. Its national power had always been the strongest. This was also the biggest difference between the four extremes realm and the divine prefecture. The four extremes realm was a world dominated by large sections. In the divine prefecture, all sects had to be controlled by the imperial power. Even if they had a Xiantian expert, they would not dare to touch the bottom line of the imperial power. The divine prefecture had already experienced an era like the four extremes realm. However, the appearance of the Great Xia had forcefully changed this situation. Ning Chen had 2 goals in coming here. The first was to find a way to obtain more information about the four extremes sacred grounds and even find a chance to enter the sacred grounds. The second was what he needed to do the most right now. He needed to find a sword. Since even Mu Bai and the senior were unable to surpass a sword without a sword, he could only treat those words as nonsense. Finding a suitable sword was the most important thing for him at this stage of the world. The Lihua dynasty was famous for its forging. The 2 divine blacksmiths were famous far and wide. It was the origin of many divine weapons in the world. It was rumored that one of the 2 divine blacksmiths, a heavenly blacksmith, came from the sacred grounds. He was also a guest elder of the sacred grounds. The title of heavenly blacksmith was bestowed by the sacred grounds. In comparison, the title of earthly blacksmith was slightly inferior. It was bestowed by the Lihua dynasty. The difference of one word was like heaven and earth. At night, Ning Chen entered the heavenly blacksmith manor. When his spiritual sense swept out, he felt a powerful aura. It was without a doubt a Xiantian expert. Within the heavenly blacksmith manor, thousands of weapons were spread out on high platforms in the 4 weapon halls. Sabers, spears, swords, halberds, all of them were present. Ning Chen searched for a long time. In the end, he shook his head in disappointment and turned to leave. Within the earthly blacksmith manor, a skinny old man stood beside a blazing furnace. The heavy hammer in his hand clanged as he smashed it down, sparks flying. Who would have thought that this ordinary-looking old man was a world-renowned earthly blacksmith? Beside the stove, the little boy who was pulling the bellows was so tired that he was sweating profusely. He kept mumbling to himself. "Master, let's take a break." The little boy raised his head and asked for instructions. "Hold on a little longer, it'll be over soon." The old man impatiently wiped his sweat and said. You said that 2 hours ago. The little boy grumbled, his face filled with resentment. You're just a child, so you can't bear even the slightest bit of hardship. Stop talking nonsense and continue pulling. Otherwise, you won't have anything to eat tomorrow. The old man repeatedly raised the hammer in his hand as he lectured them. The little boy lowered his head resentfully and did not say anything else. He obediently pulled the bellows. Dang dang. In the silent night, the sound of hammering echoed through the courtyard. As sparks flew, a silhouette in plain clothes appeared out of thin air, waiting quietly to the side. The little boy was startled to see the figure that had suddenly appeared in the courtyard, and his hands involuntarily stopped moving. A large hand landed on the little boy's head, causing him to cry out in pain. He turned his head to look at the old man with dissatisfaction. What are you looking at? Keep pulling, the earthen craftsman snapped. The little boy pouted and continued pulling the bellows with both hands. Ning Chen patiently waited on the side, his eyes looking at a sword among the many weapons in the hall behind the old man. A moment later, he looked away. Time slowly passed, and the iron sword in the old man's hand gradually took shape. It looked ordinary, but after entering the water, it emitted a chilling coldness. Venerable sir, what brings you to the earthen craftsman manor? The earthen craftsman walked to the side and placed the iron sword on the weapon rack. To be able to silently appear in front of him without alerting a single guard, there was no doubt that this person was a Xiantian expert. This junior has come to ask for a sword, Ning Chen respectfully said. The earthen craftsman walked back to the furnace and calmly said, which one do you like? Ning Chen's eyes moved. In the hall, a dark green sword trembled slightly and flew out. The earthen craftsman glanced at it and said, since you've come to ask for a sword, why don't you choose the one with the best material? Ning Chen gently stroked the sword in front of him and seriously said, this one suits me the best. There were too many divine weapons in the world, just like the divine sword in the underworld. However, if it wasn't his, there was no point in forcing it. Help me do something, and this sword is yours, the earthen craftsman slowly said. Senior earthen craftsman, please speak, Ning Chen calmly said. There are 3 green jade trees in the Black Rock Sea. I need one, but there are Xiantian experts guarding the place. Whether you want to go or not is up to you, the earthen craftsman said calmly as he tidied up the tools on the furnace. Ning Chen thought for a moment and nodded. This junior will do his best. With that, Ning Chen waved his hand and sent the sword back to the hall. With a move of his feet, he quickly left. Seeing the white figure disappear into the night, the little boy finally dared to speak. He whispered, Master, is that person really a venerable? He's so young. The earthen craftsman picked up the hammer, tongs, and other forging tools and said casually, there are many geniuses in this world, and there are also many lucky people. Everyone has their own opportunities. You just need to do your own thing well. There's no need to be envious of others. The little boy nodded. He didn't quite understand, but at the same time, he seemed to understand something. The Black Rock Sea was 1,500 miles away from Qingli City. It wasn't a sea, but a dangerous land filled with rugged mountains. The Black Rock Sea was very large, and it stretched as far as the eye could see. On the black soil, there were black tree-shaped stones. They were densely packed, and from a distance, it looked like a black sea. Ning Chen walked over, step by step in the sea of stones, patiently searching for traces of the green jade trees. The auras of the Holy Land's experts were hidden. If a Xiantian expert deliberately hid himself, it would be very difficult for others to sense him. However, if he carefully sensed it, he could still sense a powerful pressure coming from the Black Rock Sea. After a long time, Ning Chen finally found the location of the green jade trees. His figure flashed, and he quickly rushed over. When he was 100 steps away from the 3 green jade trees, Ning Chen suddenly stopped. His aura surged, and he coldly said, "Why aren't you coming out to see me?" His domineering words echoed through the Black Rock Sea. Combined with the surging spiritual qi, the Holy Land's experts hiding in the shadows unconsciously frowned and walked out. You are. Facing an unfamiliar expert, Yu Yangtian didn't dare be careless. A four-colored medallion appeared in Ning Chen's hand. With a wave of his hand, it flew over. Yu Yangtian received the medallion and scanned it with his spiritual sense. He immediately knelt down respectfully. Greetings, Holy Envoy. The Realm Master has ordered you to pick a green jade tree and hand it over to me. You can't make a mistake, said Ning Chen. Yu Yangtian frowned once more. What did the Realm Master want with the green jade tree? Holy Envoy, please wait a moment. Yu Yangtian respectfully bowed and then walked over to the 3 green jade trees. Circulating his true qi, the ground trembled, and a green jade tree slowly rose up. Yu Yangtian intentionally left his back to Ning Chen. As he collected the green jade tree, he was secretly on guard. However, Ning Chen just stood there quietly, not moving at all. There was nothing unusual about him. After a while, Yu Yangtian let down his guard. Perhaps he really was worrying too much. Holy Envoy, please accept this. Yu Yangtian walked up and handed over the 4-level sacred medallion and the green jade tree. Ning Chen took them, turned around, and walked away. Looking at the former's back, Yu Yangtian helplessly shook his head. He was becoming more and more suspicious. In the earthly craftsman manner, Ning Chen returned. The earthly craftsman and the boy were stunned. This was too fast. Senior earthly craftsman, please fulfill your promise, said Ning Chen seriously as he took out the green jade tree. The earthly craftsman's expression became a bit strange. You really want to exchange? The sword you chose can't compare to the green jade tree in your hand. Ning Chen gently smiled. No matter how precious this green jade tree is, I can't turn it into a sword. Without senior earthly craftsman's divine skill, it's just a piece of broken wood. You don't need to try to bewitch this old man. I won't fall for it, said the earthly craftsman. To the side, the boy looked down on the old man. It'd be strange if you didn't fall for it. In the end, the earthly craftsman was someone who had seen the world. After being hit by a sugar-coated bullet, he quickly recovered and said, actually, you can also go find a heavenly craftsman. With this green jade tree, even if you ask him to make 100 swords for you, he won't hesitate. Ha! Ning Chen inwardly laughed. He did want to, but everyone knew that heavenly craftsmen were from the Holy Lands. For him to take something from the Holy Lands but go find a heavenly craftsman was purely stupid. Senior earthly craftsman's skill is number 1 in the world. I don't like the swords made by others. Ning Chen continued to bewitch him. The earth craftsman laughed heartily, and said, your temper is very much to this old man's liking. Since you call me senior, I can't take advantage of you. I'll take 1/3 of this green jade wood, and I'll forge a sword for you with the remaining 2/3. Many thanks, senior earthly craftsman, said Ning Chen respectfully. The boy covered his forehead. This old man really didn't have the ability to resist. What the boy didn't know was that the earthly craftsman had heard a lot of flattery in his life. How could he be confused by a few words from Ning Chen? However, as a craftsman, what he cared about the most was whether or not he could make a more perfect product. With the green jade tree, this desire could be improved. Moreover, in this world, every Xiantian venerable had an extremely high status. Even the imperial families of the 4 great dynasties had to treat them politely, not daring to offend them. Ever since Ning Chen appeared last night, his every word and action had given him enough respect. Although the earthly craftsman's personality was strange, he wasn't someone who didn't know what was good for him. In any case, the swords he made were for people to use. Rather than giving it to someone else, he might as well give it to this young man who looked slightly more pleasing to the eye. After preparing for half a day, the earthly craftsman told the boy to guard the house well. Then he brought Ning Chen out of Qingli City. Ordinary flames were no longer effective in forging the green jade tree. He needed to find an old friend to help him. Chapter 229. In the north of Li Fire King City, in a remote area, the earth craftsman brought Ning Chen over. Not long after, a simple and crude courtyard appeared in front of them. The surroundings were extremely desolate. There were rocks, valleys, and everything else. However, there wasn't the slightest trace of life. Only today did Ning Chen understand what it meant to be in the middle of nowhere. He had originally thought that he was low-key enough. He hadn't expected someone to be even better at hiding than him. "Old Manly, an old friend has come to see you." The earth craftsman shouted in front of the courtyard, causing Ning Chen's ears to ring. "Old Manly, I'm not deaf. There's no need to be so loud." As he spoke, the door of the wooden house was pushed open with a creak, and an old man with a withered face appeared. He was sitting in a wheelchair, and his right leg and left arm were empty. It was a sad sight to behold. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. What a powerful Xiantian. This seemingly ordinary old man was at least a third tribulation Xiantian expert. Oh! What a young child. Old Manly also noticed Ning Chen beside the earth craftsman. A Xiantian expert who wasn't even 20 years old was truly shocking. "Greetings, Senior Li," Ning Chen cupped his fists in greeting. To be able to cultivate to the third tribulation Xiantian with such a crippled body, this kind of perseverance and willpower was admirable. However, Ning Chen had still been careful. He had been using spiritual qi to protect himself, hiding his cultivation base to prevent others from suspecting him. Ha! Old Manly laughed hoarsely. He glanced at the earth craftsman and said, "Old Manly, you don't come here for no reason. Speak, what do you want from me?" The earth craftsman's expression became serious. "I'm here to borrow your Li flame." Old Manly was startled and asked in surprise, "You obtained the green jade wood?" The earth craftsman waved his hand, and a dazzling green jade wood appeared. It looked like jade, but it wasn't jade. Old Manly narrowed his eyes. This was the legendary green jade wood. As expected, it was extraordinary. "How did you obtain it?" Old Manly looked at Ning Chen. Without question, this green jade wood had been obtained by this young man. This was a treasure of a sacred land, and the earth craftsman had been coveting it for quite some time. "I tricked it," Ning Chen said honestly. He knew very well that this matter could not be concealed for more than a few days. It would be exposed soon, so there was no need to lie. How bold! Old Manly smiled, then turned his wheelchair around and said, "Follow me." The three of them walked towards the northwest. Not long after, a huge gully appeared in front of them. It was more than 10 feet wide, and they couldn't see the bottom. "You may leave." Old Li waved his hand, and the three of them turned into streams of light and entered the ravine. A powerful heatwave assaulted his face. Every time he descended a foot, the temperature would increase exponentially. Half a quarter of an hour later, the three of them descended to the ground. In front of them, a huge platform was surging violently, and blue flames were surging. Even from far away, they could feel the terrifying heat. A glint flashed in Ning Chen's eyes. Was this Li fire? It looked like a flame that was born with the help of the earth fire. It was really strange. The Lihua dynasty was famous because of the Lihua dynasty. Since Old Li was guarding this place, his status must be extraordinary. The earth craftsman walked up and waved his hand, sending the green jade wood into the Li fire. His hands formed a series of seals, and black runes immediately appeared on his right arm. They were like armor that rapidly spread across his entire arm. In that instant, the earth craftsman's aura rapidly soared, only stopping when he reached half-step Xiantian. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. It seemed he had underestimated this earth craftsman. To be able to receive the title of earth craftsman, he truly did have his own extraordinary aspects. Old friend, it's time for you to take action. The earth craftsman glanced at Oldly. Oldly didn't waste any words. He raised his only right hand, and an incomparably powerful energy surged out. The surrounding spiritual chi was drawn into the flames in front of him. The leaf fire's color rapidly deepened, turning from blue to inky blue. It crazily roared. The earth craftsman stared at the green jade wood within the flames, waiting for the moment to change. Time slowly passed. Within the leaf fire, the green jade wood floated up and down. Green lines began to appear. They were very faint, but they were very clear to the three of them. In that instant, a black gold hammer flew out of the earth craftsman's hand and smashed into the green jade wood. Waves of fire soared into the sky, and the green jade wood trembled. Following the lines, it began to spread, slightly changing its shape. Clang! Another huge sound rang out as the earth craftsman's hammer smashed down once more. Following that, one sound after another rang out incessantly, shaking everyone's hearts. Ning Chen stood to the side and watched, not saying a word. He patiently waited. After an unknown amount of time, a small section of the green jade wood flew out of the leaf fire and stabbed into the stone wall. The earth craftsman didn't bother with it. He continued to focus on the black gold hammer in his hand, forging the most difficult sword of his life. The sun set and the moon rose, and the sun rose again. Day after day passed. Within the leaf fire, the green jade wood pattern became clearer and clearer. The ink blue flame surged violently. As time passed, the blue color gradually faded, turning into a pitch black color. On the 10th day, dark clouds gathered in the clear sky. With a cracking sound, thunder rumbled, and heavy rain poured down. However, before the rain could even get close to the three, it was evaporated by the terrifying temperature in the valley. The rain continued for a day and night, and only cleared up at noon the next day. The loud sounds in the valley never stopped, continuing without rest. None of the three knew that outside the valley, the entire world was in chaos. The news of the Holy Land's envoy's accident had finally spread. It originated from the heavenly craftsman going to the Blackstone Sea to retrieve the green jade wood. Yu Yang Tian immediately felt that something was wrong and understood that he had been deceived. Half a day later, 3 Xiantian experts walked out from the 4 extreme holy lands. Led by Yu Yang Tian, they went all out to search for Ning Chen's traces. As for the Blackstone Sea, there were other experts from the Holy Land guarding it. The Holy Land's envoy went missing, and the green jade wood was deceived. This was the first time in thousands of years that the Holy Land had suffered such a great provocation and humiliation. Especially Yu Yang Tian, the anger in his heart was so strong that it was difficult to suppress. After the news spread, the world was in an uproar. All the major sects were shocked by this person who dared to provoke the Holy Land. The Nine Clouds Mountain became the first place the Holy Land's experts went to, because the Holy Envoy's last known location was the Nine Clouds Mountain. However, Yu Yang Tian investigated for a few days and didn't find any useful clues. The Holy Envoy's cultivation was extraordinary. If he had been killed in the continent of the Nine Clouds, there would definitely have been traces left behind. The only one who had guessed the truth was Meng Xuanji, but she didn't say anything. She just watched the situation develop. Without any clues or evidence, Yu Yang Tian couldn't blame the continent of the Nine Clouds. After all, the continent of the Nine Clouds wasn't an ordinary major sect. The 5 Zun cultivators were extremely strong, especially Meng Xuanji. She was the strongest cultivator in the world who had almost broken through to the 3 disasters layer. In the Fire Valley, the sword forging process had already reached the 19th day. The green jade wood was gradually taking shape in the black flames. The earthly craftsman glanced at Ning Chen and said, "It's your turn." Ning Chen took a step forwards and cut his right hand. Drops of blood fell onto the sword and quickly entered the sword's veins. The earthly craftsman's hammer continued smashing down. Blood splashed everywhere as he completed the final step of tempering the sword. From noon until the bright moon hung high in the sky, the sword that had been forged for 19 days was finally about to take shape. Boom! The moment the hammer smashed down, the sword shone brightly with blood-red light. A surge of sword intent spread out with a bang. The three people closest to it were immediately forced back a few steps. Their blood and chi surged. The wind and clouds in the valley instantly changed. The ground trembled and rumbled. "Quick," said the earthly craftsman hurriedly. Ning Chen immediately stepped forward and grabbed the sword. The second tribulation of the Xiantian realm completely erupted, forcefully suppressing the surging sword intent. Arg! With a painful groan, blood surged everywhere. The sword that had just taken shape actually forced its way into Ning Chen's arm. A bloody mist filled the air. It was abnormally shocking. The sword merged with the body. The boundless vitality of the green jade would burst forth. Ning Chen's cultivation immediately rose rapidly. His heaven, earth, and life cyclones rapidly expanded. It only slowed down when he reached the 5th rank. The sword disappeared. The changes in the Fire Valley also stopped. Everything returned to normal. Not far away, the earthly craftsman looked at the sword that had disappeared from Ning Chen's arm. A trace of relief flashed through his tired eyes. His hard work had not been in vain. "Kid, I've already forged the sword for you. However, how much this sword can grow will depend on you," said the earthly craftsman. "Many thanks, senior." Ning Chen respectfully bowed and said. "All right, I'm tired of hearing you say that." The earthly craftsman impatiently waved his hand. He then turned to his old friend and said, "Old Li, it's been hard on you these past few days." Old man Li smiled and said, "It's nothing." After saying that, he looked at Ning Chen and asked, "Have you thought of a name for the sword?" "Destiny." Ning Chen lightly spat out 2 words and replied. The earthly craftsman and Old Li repeated the name in their minds. They didn't feel too much about this strange name. It was just a name. As long as it wasn't called cat, dog, or cat, it was fine. The three of them rested for 2 hours before leaving the valley. Old Li returned to his small courtyard, while the earthly craftsman and Ning Chen hurried back to Qingli City. Half a day later, the two of them returned to Qingli City. When Ning Chen heard the news, he immediately understood what was going on. The disappearance of the 4 extreme holy emissary had been exposed. In the earthly craftsman manner, the little boy looked at Ning Chen as he softly recounted what had happened in the past few days. After hearing his little disciple's story, the earthly craftsman strangely glanced at Ning Chen, who was calmly drinking tea as if nothing had happened. He really didn't expect this kid to cause so much trouble. "Kid, you never thought about whether I would sell you to the sacred land," said the earthly craftsman. "Senior earthly craftsman isn't that kind of person. Moreover, Senior doesn't seem to have a good impression of the sacred land." Ning Chen lightly laughed. He wasn't stupid. If it was the heavenly craftsman manner, he definitely wouldn't sit down and drink tea so quietly. "Smart kid," said the earthly craftsman. Chapter 230. In the palace of the Lihua dynasty, a young emperor who looked to be in his 30s sat on the dragon throne. Looking at the order from the sacred land, a cold look flashed across his face. No one was willing to rely on others, especially the emperor of a dynasty. How could he allow others to sleep beside him? The Lihua dynasty had been controlled by the 4 extremes sacred land for too long. How could he be satisfied? He was interested in the young Xiantian expert that the sacred land was looking for. He wanted to see what kind of person dared to make trouble for the 4 extremes sacred land. "Men," Li Yan said. "Your Majesty," a guard ran into the palace and knelt down. "Ask the eldest princess to come here," Li Yan ordered. "Yes, sir." The guard respectfully accepted the order and quickly retreated. Li Yan looked at the order from the sacred land in his hand. His eyes kept flashing. In terms of finding people, no one was better than his sister. However, this time, they were looking for an Xiantian expert. It would be much more difficult. In the earthly craftsman manner, the two foxes in the little boy's eyes were sitting quietly in their seats, each thinking about something. Ning Chen frowned deeply. However, he didn't look like he was worried about anything. Instead, he looked like he was preparing to do something but couldn't think of a way. The earthly craftsman had many things to think about. Of course, it didn't have much to do with Ning Chen. After all, he had taken 1/3 of the green jade wood. The two of them were now in the same boat. He had never thought of selling Ning Chen out, even if the sacred land could give him more in return, including 1/3 of the green jade wood. Now, the only thing he wanted to do was to create the most perfect weapon in his life. However, he didn't have enough materials. The green jade wood was only one of them. He still had to think of ways to get the remaining materials. Thinking of this, the earthly craftsman looked up and saw Ning Chen frowning as he thought about something. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Kid, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how to get the 2 green jade woods too," Ning Chen replied instinctively. The earthly craftsman was speechless. After a long while, he asked, "Why didn't you trick them too?" Ning Chen glanced at the former, and he felt disdain in his heart as he said, "The protectors of the Blackstone Ocean aren't idiots. It's already difficult for me to obtain one. If I were to ask for an exorbitant price, then it would definitely arouse suspicion." The earthly craftsman smiled and said, "There's no point in thinking about this. You'd better think about how to hide your identity. I believe that the sacred land is already searching for you everywhere. If there's no good way, my earthly craftsman manner won't be able to hide you for long." Only then did Ning Chen remember this. He waved his hand to disperse the spiritual qi of heaven and earth that he had used to conceal his cultivation base. 5th grade post-celestial. The earth craftsman's eyelids twitched violently as a look of disbelief appeared on his aged face. The little boy's cultivation base was very low, so he still could not see anything. Looking at his master's exaggerated expression, his eyes were filled with curiosity. "Why is this happening?" the earth craftsman asked in confusion. He had seen such a situation before. With such a huge difference in cultivation level, no one would believe him even if he told them. "It's a long story. In short, I don't need to deliberately hide my identity. As long as I don't make a move, even a pre-celestial ranker won't be able to see anything. Even more so, no one will suspect a 5th grade prenatal youngster." Ning Chen replied. The earth craftsman smacked his lips in disbelief. There were indeed strange things every year, but there were especially many this year. "How about we make another deal?" The earth craftsman thought for a while and said. Ning Chen's face revealed a trace of obvious vigilance. He said, "Senior earth craftsman, please speak. I still need a material. Why don't you help me find it? In return, I can agree to any of your conditions." The earth craftsman's tone was full of temptation. Ning Chen probed, "What material?" "Blazing sun iron." The earth craftsman said seriously. Ning Chen's eyes moved. So it was this material. In the past, he had obtained a piece of blazing sun iron at the Qilin Pavilion ranking ceremony. However, this item was left in the Jiming Marquis residence, so he could only stare at it. "The hope of finding blazing sun iron by myself is too small." Ning Chen did not reject, but he also expressed his concerns. This was not the Great Xia, and his information was limited. Especially this kind of rare treasure, the sources of information had always been scarce, and it was very difficult to obtain. "I can introduce someone to you. She will definitely be of help." The earth craftsman continued. "Who?" Ning Chen asked. "The eldest princess of the Lihua dynasty, Li Yue." The earth craftsman slowly said. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. "Senior earth craftsman, with your relationship with the Lihua dynasty, if you want to find something, just say the word." Why do you have to go in such a big circle? The earth craftsman seriously replied, it's very simple. Because the heavenly craftsman will definitely not let this kind of divine material fall into my hands. The Xiantian experts of the Lihua dynasty have to be wary of the existence of the Holy Land and cannot act. Therefore, even if I find blazing sun iron through the power of the dynasty, I will not be able to get it back. I promise you. Ning Chen thought for a while and agreed. Apart from their deal, the earth craftsman had also helped him forge a sword. Otherwise, he would have to seriously consider whether or not he would agree to the earth craftsman's conditions. At this time, the old fox had already returned to forging. In the words of the child, the old man would feel uncomfortable if he didn't hammer at least a few times a day. Ning Chen knew that a strange old man like the earth craftsman would always have some strange habits, so it wasn't strange. The child was dragged away to do manual labor, so Ning Chen was free. He took out the inky sword he had just obtained and waved it around a few times. It was quite handy, enough for a fight. In truth, he didn't have such strict requirements for swords. Of course, that was only relative to Mu Bai and his senior. At the very least, he didn't care about the swords in the heavenly craftsman manner. The words he had said to the earth craftsman that day weren't all just flattery. With this sword, the next time he faced a Xiantian like the four extreme holy emissary, he wouldn't have to put in so much effort. The only unfortunate thing was that he couldn't use the sword in his body in the short term. The green jade wood was special and required a long time of maintenance and tempering. He couldn't rush it. In addition, there was still 2 green jade wood in the Black Stone Sea. He had to find a way to get them. The green jade wood contained an extremely large amount of vitality that would be beneficial to his cultivation. Moreover, obtaining these 2 green jade wood would also be of great help in tempering the sword in his body. However, the 4 extreme holy lands' protection of the Black Stone Sea would definitely be even tighter now. If he wanted to enter again, it would definitely be difficult. The sound of hammering rang out from the front yard and spread throughout the entire earth craftsman manor. The flickering flames reflected a red light that was extremely dazzling in the dark night. Ning Chen walked towards the front yard and looked at the old man. Senior earth craftsman, this junior is going out to get some fresh air. Clean up after you've caused trouble and come back, said the earth craftsman without even raising his head. Boorish, muttered the little boy. However, he was slapped on the head and didn't dare say anything else. Ning Chen nodded and turned into a ray of light that shot off into the distance. The little boy secretly envied him. When would he be able to cultivate to such a level? 5 kilometers away from the Black Stone Sea, Ning Chen appeared. Looking at the boundless sea of stones, he raised his right hand. Wind and clouds swirled as a ray of sword chi condensed. In an instant, the sword chi shot out, shaking the heavens and earth. The sword chi whistled through the air, leaving behind a terrifying sword scar in the sky before shooting into the sea of stones. Impudent! 2 furious roars rang out. In the next moment, 2 abnormally powerful auras erupted. Dazzling light soared into the sky, chasing after the source of the sword chi. When Ning Chen saw this, he didn't say anything and immediately fled. From the old man's tone, he could more or less feel that the relationship between the entire Lihua dynasty and the 4 extreme holy lands was not as harmonious as it seemed on the surface. Actually, this was a very normal thing. In the world, there wasn't a single dynasty that was willing to be controlled by another. This was good news for him. Li Youwei's identity was extraordinary. If he could build a good relationship with her, it would definitely be of great help to him in the future. However, this woman was not easy to deal with. It would definitely not be easy to get her help. During dinner, there were only 2 people in the spacious hall. Li Youwei dismissed all the maids and personally served them. Li Youwei was too close. Their clothes touched, and her warm body fragrance lingered between the two of them. Ning Chen felt uncomfortable all over. If he didn't want to build a good relationship with her, he would have already left. It had to be said that although Ning Chen had always been excessively rational, possessing a calmness that far surpassed his peers, he was still not even 20 years old. When it came to matters between men and women, he really didn't know how to handle them. If it was before, he would have been able to just leave. But now, he couldn't do that. The reason why Li Yuwei was called the dynasty's bandit in beautiful clothing wasn't just because of her outstanding methods. Her eyes were also exceptionally sinister. She immediately saw that the previously calm young man had become a bit unnatural. Li Yuwei's lips curved dangerously. It was good that he had a weakness. As long as he had a weakness, she could use it. Although the young man in front of her didn't seem too extraordinary, she had a feeling that he definitely wasn't as simple as he seemed. Her intuition had never been wrong, and this time was no different. Ning Chen moved away without leaving a trace, slightly increasing the distance between the two of them. However, how could Li Yuwei give up on this prey that was sent to her mouth? She leaned forward slightly and pressed herself against him again. Unknowingly, the two of them had already moved half the table. The smile on Li Yuwei's lips also became more and more dangerous. Seeing that the former still wanted to run, Li Yuwei's fair arms wrapped around him. She leaned lightly behind him and said softly, "Young Master Ning, you seem to be very afraid of me. What's wrong? Yuwei won't eat you." Feeling the moist breath beside his ear, Ning Chen unnaturally wanted to dodge. However, he found that this pair of seemingly weak and boneless arms wrapped around his body like a snake. He couldn't break free even if he wanted to. "Princess, you're drunk." Ning Chen tried his best to lean forward and avoid contact. The next moment, Li Yuwei's entire body leaned forward. Her fine black hair hung down and floated between Ning Chen's breaths. There was no longer any possibility of escape. Ning Chen's body stiffened for a long time before gradually relaxing. His expression returned to normal. He drank when he should, ate when he should, and did whatever he wanted. Li Yuwei was slightly surprised. It seemed that she had underestimated him. "Princess." A little palace maid hurriedly ran over. When she saw the ambiguous posture of the two in the hall, she immediately turned pale with fright and knelt down while trembling. Li Yuwei straightened her body and the smile on her face disappeared. She said calmly, "What's the matter?" "Reporting. Reporting to Princess, Duke Muyang is here." The little princess trembled. Hearing this name, Li Yuwei unconsciously frowned. She clearly didn't like this person. "Tell him that I'm already resting," Li Yuwei said. "Ha, Yuwei, why are you so unreasonable?" Amidst the hearty laughter, a young and handsome figure appeared. There were 9 python patterns on his gorgeous clothes. He was dignified and noble, showing that the person's identity was extraordinary. Duke Muyang, the youngest duke in the Lihua dynasty. He was also the person in the younger generation who was most likely to step into the Xiantian realm. On the seats, Ning Chen finally got rid of Li Yuwei's entanglement with great difficulty and relaxed a lot. He didn't care who the person was at all and focused on eating his food. He was only at the 5th grade of the Hotian realm. How could he not eat? However, just because he didn't want to cause trouble didn't mean that no one would. Duke Muyang's expression immediately turned cold when he saw Ning Chen in the hall. He had never seen Li Yuwei eat alone with a man. Just who was this young man? Duke Muyang turned his head and asked, "Yuwei, who is this? Do I have to report to you about my matters?" Li Yuwei's usual smile disappeared and she didn't even try to hide it. Ning Chen glanced at Li Yuwei in astonishment. According to his impression, even if this woman didn't like Duke Muyang, she shouldn't make it so obvious. "Kid, why are you here?" Duke Muyang's eyes were cold. Ning Chen wasn't a fool. On the contrary, he was very smart. How could he not see why Duke Muyang was so hostile towards him? However, it was useless to say anything to this kind of person. It would only be a waste of energy. Ning Chen lowered his head and continued eating, ignoring him. Killing intent rose in Duke Muyang's eyes. Duke Muyang, don't go too far. Li Yue warned coldly. Duke Muyang didn't want to do anything to Li Yue, but he couldn't hide the anger in his heart. His feet moved and he arrived in front of the young man he loathed in a single step. Impudent! Li Yue was furious. She stepped forward and blocked the attack. She flipped her hand and met it head-on. There was a loud explosion and the two of them both took half a step back. They were actually evenly matched. Duke Muyang, this is my place. It's not your place to behave atrociously, Li Yue said sternly. Duke Muyang glared at Ning Chen, who was still sitting quietly in his seat, and said coldly, "Kid, you'd better never leave the princess residence." With that, Duke Muyang flung his sleeve and left angrily. The table was a mess. It was full of shattered plates and cups from the fight just now. Ning Chen, who hadn't said a word from beginning to end, looked at his right hand that had been cut by a wine cup fragment. An almost imperceptible coldness flashed through the depths of his eyes. He didn't want to cause trouble, but someone had provoked him. Li Yue walked forward and took out a silk handkerchief. She bent down and carefully wrapped it around his injured hand. "Young Master Ning, I've frightened you." Li Yue gently smiled. Ning Chen looked at the woman in front of him, who had a face full of anger just now but was now acting as gentle as water, and said very seriously, "Princess, I'm here to complete the task that senior earthly craftsman gave me. To you, I have no value to be used, nor am I a threat. You don't have to waste so much energy on me." Young Master Ning must be joking. You're someone Elder D trusts, so you're naturally You's friend. How could friends use each other or threaten each other? Li Yue gently smiled. Young Master, Duke Muyang is narrow-minded and definitely won't let this go. You should rest in the residence tonight, continued Li Yue. Ning Chen thought about it and nodded. If he didn't want to expose his strength, he really wouldn't be able to return tonight. Young Master, please come with me. Li Yue stood up. Ning Chen stood up and followed her. They walked towards the back of the hall. The guest room of the princess residence was also very spacious and clean. It wasn't much better than the Earth Craftsman Manor. Li Yue's residence was practically the most luxurious residence in Qingli City. It could be seen just how much importance the Lihua dynasty's emperor placed on his younger sister. Young Master Ning, are you satisfied? If you're not, there are many more rooms in the residence, asked Li Yue. Ning Chen wasn't dissatisfied with the room at all. Instead, he felt awkward with Li Yue here. He said, "Princess, you've also been tired. Please go back and rest early." Li Yue's lips curled up. Her beautiful face was exceptionally beautiful under the candlelight. She softly said, "Young Master Ning, you seem to really be afraid of me." Chapter 232. 3 Xiantian experts from the 4 extreme Holy Land flew out, their powerful auras covering the sky. Each of them was at least at the 4th tribulation level. At the same time, the Disaster King personally flew out of the Longevity Palace, heading southwest. The pressure of the 3 disasters was so obvious that the Xiantian experts from the various large sects all sensed it. They walked out of their palaces and looked at the distant horizon in shock. The Disaster King had personally come out. What was his purpose this time? In the southwest, Prince Yen brought Amon along as they walked through the wilderness, heading toward the southern polar region. All of a sudden, the wind and clouds in the void roiled as a terrifying pressure descended. Light flashed as the Disaster King, along with Xian Tian, Xian Kong, and Xian Lai, the 3 Holy Lands experts, appeared. "It really is you," said the Disaster King with boundless killing intent. They hadn't expected to meet in the Divine Great Land, but in the 4 extreme region. Prince Yen calmly looked at the experts in front of him. What was supposed to come had come. There was no way the 4 extreme regions master hadn't noticed the changes in the 4 extreme region. Hand over the 4 extreme sources and help me and the realm master open the passage between the 2 realms. Then, I'll spare your life today, threatened the Disaster King coldly. Ah man. Prince Yen did not answer. He turned his head and said softly. Oh. Amon obediently replied. She placed her sword on the ground and took 2 steps back. Prince Yen waved his hand, and the sword rack trembled slightly. The 2 swords flew out, turning into 2 streaks of light that streaked through the night and entered his hands. Come. He stepped forward, and the ground shook. His black hair danced in the moonlight. You don't know what's good for you, sneered the Disaster King. His aura erupted, and light soared. When the 2 kings met, heaven and earth trembled. Their auras collided, destroying the earth and sky. Xian Tian, Xian Kong, and Xian Lai surrounded them, unleashing their full power. Light soared into the sky. Kill! The 3 of them led the charge. Xian Tian's hand moved, and his clear sword shone brightly. Xian Kong and Xian Lai followed behind. Their halberd and axe slashed down. Prince Yan's azure sword flashed, and the space condensed. The clear sword was obstructed and trembled violently. The halberd and the axe arrived at the same time, and the red sword was like lightning. The 3 weapons connected, avoiding the main force and attacking the weak. Qing Hung defended while one attacked. One was slow while the other was fast. There were no openings at all. The 3 of them clashed and were quickly sent flying. The Disaster King coldly snorted. He condensed true essence in his palm and rushed over. The green sword in Prince Yan's hand met the attack head-on, and the sky shook violently. Drink! When Xian Tian saw the situation, his figure flashed, and the bright sword instantly entered the battle. It was a sword strike that was extremely fast. Its sword intent was unparalleled and rarely seen in the world. A hint of admiration flashed past Prince Yan's eyes as he felt the urge to fight with his sword. He waved his green sword and knocked away the Disaster King. The red sword in his left hand was as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, the 2 swords had already exchanged over 10 moves. In the blink of an eye, Xian Tian flew out. His right shoulder was injured, and half of his body was dyed in blood. Xian Kong and Xian Lai pressed forward once again. Their halberd and axe were as heavy as Mount Tai, slamming down. Prince Yen waved his hand and the green sword returned to its scabbard. The Zhigao flew out, and the thick earth qi condensed into a sword. It forcefully resisted the halberd and axe. There was a shocking explosion. The ground beneath the 3 of them cracked, and a huge bottomless ravine appeared. The 2 of them stepped back. Their blood qi surged, and the corners of their mouths were dyed red. The biting cold wind was bone-chilling. The legendary battle pet warrior in the middle of the battle looked calm. The 3 saints of the sacred lands looked solemn. The person in front of them was so powerful. 1 disaster, 3 disasters, 5 disasters, 2 disasters and 4 disasters. It was rare in the world, but they couldn't gain the upper hand in front of one person. The Disaster King couldn't suppress the anger in his heart. His true qi rose rapidly, and he unleashed all of his techniques. In the blink of an eye, the ground began to tremble violently, and cracks began to appear one after another. Under the guidance of the surging Jinqi, the cracks slowly rose into the air, and the fearsome might emanating from them caused the color of the night sky to change. Prince Yan's eyes moved. His red sword returned to its scabbard, and a black light spread, swallowing the sky and the earth. 1 sword forbidden martial arts, no Tao in the world. When the 2 ultimate moves clashed, the world was hit by another catastrophe. The ground was torn apart in a crazy explosion. Strands of sand surrounded Ah Man, blocking all of the aftershocks. The 3 of them pressed forward again. Prince Yen fought against the three of them by himself. His swords shone with light, and his sword intent was shocking. Seeing that the sword of bravery was unshakable, Xian Kong's and Xian Lai's faces flashed. They took out their halberds and axes and flashed toward Ah Man. Prince Yan's expression changed slightly. He wanted to help Ah Man. The Disaster King sneered and stepped in front of Prince Yen. Although Xian Tian didn't agree, the opportunity was fleeting. He couldn't waste any time. He had no choice but to block Prince Yen with his sword. Xian Kong and Xian Lai's halberds and axes attacked together. The sand around Ah Man shook violently and almost scattered. Ah Man tasted something sweet in her throat. She was injured by a trace of aftershock, but she still smiled sweetly and swallowed the blood in her mouth. In the Princess Royal's residence, Ning Chen, who was trying to get rid of Li Youwei's teasing, suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest and fell down. Li Youwei's expression changed. She stepped forward and supported him. Her eyes were filled with shock. What happened? In the wilderness of the Southwest Territory, the battle had reached its climax. Xian Kong and Xian Lai surrounded Ah Man. The halberds and axes were merciless as they slashed down again. Not far away, the Disaster King and Xian Tian were fighting a legendary battle pet warrior. Prince Yan's eyes were filled with killing intent. The abyss condensation in his left hand spun, and sword intent spread out. The two people around him were forced back several steps. In that instant, the halberd left his hand and flew toward Xian Kong and Xian Lai. With a clang, the halberd shattered. Xian Kong was sent flying, blood splashing everywhere. However, he was still half a step too late. Xian Lai's axe fell in the end. The shield formed by the sand sword shattered. Xian Lai suffered a backlash from the sword intent and was sent flying 10 zhang away. Ah Man, who was already injured, couldn't hide it anymore. She staggered and spat out a mouthful of blood, dyeing her dress red. Seeing that Ah Man was injured, Prince Yen, who hadn't used his full strength, was finally enraged. Boundless killing intent surged from his body. The legendary battle pet warrior, who had lost his calm, was no longer merciful. The abyss condensation in his hand flew into the sky. At the same time, green and red light shot out from the sword rack, stunning the 9 heavens. 3 swords sharing the heavens, life and death pact. A terrifying whirlpool appeared in the sky. In the next moment, an endless rain of swords flew out and crashed down. The Disaster King, Xian Tian, Xian Kong, and Xian Lai's expressions changed. They used all their strength to block this shocking attack. With a loud explosion, the rain of swords destroyed the surroundings. There was no place left unscathed. At this moment, Prince Yan's body moved. He flew past them at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, 4 afterimages flickered. Sword light appeared in front of the 4 of them, cold and threatening. The Disaster King and Xian Tian blocked this sword in a sorry state. The other 2 were weaker and couldn't react in time. A sword slit their throats and they fell to the ground. Retreat. The Disaster King had lost the battle, so he quickly retreated after giving the order. Looking at his fallen companions, a trace of helplessness flashed in Xian Tian's eyes. He also left. Prince Yen didn't chase after them. His figure flickered and he appeared in front of Ah Man. Condensing qi, he poured it into her body. Within the Princess Royal residence, Ning Chen endured the pain in his chest and looked into the distance in shock. There was only one possibility for this feeling. Something had happened to Ah Man. Why? With his senior by her side, who could possibly injure her? Li Youwei stood to the side. Looking at Ning Chen, who had never lost his composure like this, a trace of surprise flashed in her eyes. Just what had happened to make this fox-like youth so flustered? "Young Master Ning, are you all right?" softly asked Li Youwei. Ning Chen returned to his senses and suppressed his pounding heart. He forced a smile and replied, "I'm fine." I'm just a bit tired. Then rest well. Yue will leave first. Li Yue knew that she couldn't continue provoking this person at this time. Smiling, she left. Within the silent room, the lanterns flickered. Ning Chen was filled with unprecedented panic. Just what had happened? In the southeastern region of the four extreme regions, there was an unknown region that seemed like a paradise on earth. It was spring all year round, and all kinds of strange flowers and plants were in full bloom. In the distance, powerful auras were faintly discernible. Even the weakest of them was at the Xiantian realm. This was a legendary place, the holy land of the four extreme experts. Within a large palace surrounded by many other palaces, an illusory figure appeared. Through a secret technique, he looked into the distance. After a long time, Xian Tian returned and half-knelt in front of the palace. He was silent. You can leave. A dignified voice rang out from the palace. Xian Tian stood and left. In the distance, within the dusky long life palace, the disaster king returned with injuries. His blood-stained armor had been cut open by a sword wound. Even someone as strong as you was defeated so miserably. As expected, this divine continence expert is truly worthy of respect. Within the longevity hall, the void swirled and a dignified voice rang out from within, lamenting. His sword is inconceivably powerful. Just in terms of sword cultivation, there's probably no one in the entire four extreme realm who can match him, said the disaster king with a gloomy expression. It's hard to injure this tiger for now. Rest well. Once I come out of seclusion, we'll discuss further. Yes. The disaster king nodded. Then he thought of something and said, how should we handle the matter of the golden feather centipede? After the last battle, the Long Life Palace suffered heavy losses. It's almost impossible for us to deal with both Nine Firmament Mountain and the Cherishing Flower Palace. I will send you Yang Tian, Xingyun, and Buyu to you. As for that young Xiantian, don't waste too much energy on him for now. Focus on the greater cause, instructed the master of the four extreme realm. Understood. The disaster king nodded and replied. If possible, do your best to keep Meng Xuanji alive. Her talent is exceptional, and she might be able to help us in the future. As soon as he finished speaking, the whirlpool in the sky slowly dissipated. Everything returned to normal. The disaster king's eyes flashed coldly. He didn't think Meng Xuanji would help them. The Long Life Palace's current situation was all thanks to her. Of course, there was also that young Xiantian. He even suspected that the Nine Firmament Mountain and that young Xiantian definitely had some sort of relationship. Otherwise, why would something have happened to the emissary of a holy land right after he had made plans to attack the Nine Firmament Mountain? It was too much of a coincidence. Chapter 233. The sky gradually brightened. Ning Chen hadn't slept the entire night. He sat in his room, doing his best to feel his own heartbeat. Only when the sun rose did Ning Chen let out a sigh of relief. That extremely bad feeling had vanished. Wild should be fine. That girl had truly frightened him. Li Yue walked over. Seeing that Ning Chen's complexion was much better than yesterday, she sweetly smiled. Young master, did you rest well last night? Not bad. Ning Chen's eyes were completely red. Li Yue walked forward and gently rubbed his face. She softly said, Young master, your face is dirty. Female rogue. Ning Chen disdained her inside, but since Wild was fine and her mood wasn't bad, he didn't bicker with her. Princess, have you found the location of the blazing sun iron? Asked Ning Chen. How could it be so fast? Li Yue shook her head. Ning Chen also felt that he had been a bit too hasty, but it was best to find it quickly. He couldn't guarantee how much longer he could endure this woman. Let's go. Royal brother wants to see you, said Li Yue. Ning Chen was startled, but he quickly reacted. Wasn't the eldest princess's royal brother the Lihua dynasty's emperor? The two of them left the princess's residence one after the other, maintaining a distance of 10 steps the entire time. Li Yue slowed down, and Ning Chen immediately slowed down as well, slowly following behind her. He was very clear that this eldest princess was definitely a problematic person in the Lihua dynasty. It was best for him to keep his distance. Right now, the 4 extreme holy lands were still looking for him. Keeping a low profile wasn't a bad thing. Li Yue frowned and stopped. Behind her, Ning Chen also stopped and looked left and right with a curious look on his face. On the streets, when the commoners saw that this woman was the eldest princess, they lowered their heads like mice seeing a cat. Those that couldn't avoid her hastily bowed and immediately left. Seeing this, Ning Chen's eyelids jumped. Just how bad was the reputation of the Lihua dynasty's eldest princess for the commoners to be so scared? Li Yue turned and walked over to him. Her right arm naturally wrapped around his, and then she tightly held onto his arm. "Young Master Ning, we should hurry up and leave." Li Yue gently smiled and threatened. Ning Chen struggled, but he was unable to break free. He lowered his head and increased his speed. The corners of Li Yue's mouth curled up without leaving a trace, looking dangerous and unfathomable. The citizens not far away revealed looks of surprise. They looked at each other and wanted to whisper to each other, but when they saw the eldest princess' smiling eyes, they quickly lowered their heads and left. "Why are they so afraid of you?" Ning Chen asked in a low voice. This was the first time he had seen someone with such a bad reputation. It was comparable to when he was in Grand Xia. However, the people of Grand Xia were valiant. Although they hated him to the core, they didn't fear him too much. "You don't know." This time, it was Li Yue's turn to be puzzled. Her reputation in the Lihua dynasty was known even by children, yet he had actually never heard of her. Ha! Ning Chen rubbed his nose. The old earth craftsman had never mentioned it to him, so he really knew nothing about it. "You'll know soon enough," Li Yue smiled and said softly. Ta-ta! Galloping horses galloped like the wind. More than 10 generals in red armor galloped over. The one in the lead was handsome and extraordinary. It was none other than Duke Muyang, who had wantonly fought in the Princess Royal's residence yesterday. Nay! More than 10 warhorses stopped in front of the two of them. Duke Muyang looked at the youth Li Yue was holding on to. The killing intent in his eyes was not concealed in the slightest. "Brat, cherish your little life that doesn't have many days left." With a flick of his whip, the warhorse neighed and immediately galloped away. The 12 generals behind him quickly followed. Li Yue's eyes flashed coldly as she reminded, Duke Muyang controls 40% of the Lihua dynasty's military power. He is arrogant and unruly. Most importantly, he is the spokesperson chosen by the sacred ground. No one in the imperial court dares to provoke him. "Young master, be careful." "Oh." Ning Chen absent-mindedly replied as he looked at the fiery figure that was following them. "You don't seem to be afraid." Li Yue's beautiful eyes narrowed as she slowly said. Ning Chen recovered from his thoughts. A trace of fear flashed across his face. Clearly, it was done on purpose. Li Yue snorted in dissatisfaction. She cursed the little fox in her heart but did not show it. She pulled the person beside her and walked toward the imperial palace. Ning Chen's mind was not here. Just now, he felt a Xiantian expert spying on him. It should be related to this Duke Muyang. The imperial palace of the Lihua dynasty was very grand. As one of the strongest rank 4 dynasties, it had a history of nearly 700 years. It was already unimaginably long. In the Lihua palace, Li Yan stood quietly as he looked at the two people walking over. A trace of surprise flashed across his calm face. It seemed that the person recommended by Elder D was much younger than he had imagined. When the two entered the palace, Li Yue bowed. Ning Chen stood and did not have any intention to kneel down. In his life, he had only kneeled to 2 people. One was his eldest grandson and the other was his senior. It was impossible for him to kneel to anyone else. Li Yan was waiting. Li Yue frowned slightly. She admired confident people, but she did not like people who did not know what was good for them. Ning Chen cupped his hands politely and said, "Greetings, Your Majesty." Li Yan stared at him without saying anything. After a long time, he smiled and said, "No need to be so polite. Men, give me a seat." Li Yue's eyes flickered. Where did this young man's confidence come from? Until now, she had not seen it. If this was not the person personally appointed by Elder D, she would really suspect that her intuition was wrong. A little eunuch came over and brought 3 chairs. Ning Chen and Li Yue sat down. Li Yan did not return to the dragon throne. Instead, he chose to sit opposite them and said, "I heard from Yue that Elder D handed the matter of finding the blazing sun iron to Brother Ning. I will not beat around the bush and ask directly. Does Brother Ning have a way to deal with the Xiantian experts beside the heavenly blacksmith?" Ning Chen nodded and said, "If we find the whereabouts of the blazing sun iron, my master will take action and bring it back." "Master?" Li Yan frowned and looked at Li Yue. Li Yue also shook her head without leaving a trace, indicating that she did not know about this matter. Li Yan's expression became serious and he asked, "Brother Ning, can you introduce me to your master? After all, this matter is of great importance. Not only is it important to Elder D, but it also concerns the fate of the Lihua dynasty in the future. There cannot be any negligence." Ning Chen thought for a moment and replied, "Yes, Your Majesty, please set a time and place. I will invite my master over." "How about tomorrow at Elder D's residence?" Li Yan said. Ning Chen nodded and said, "All right." Li Yan stood up and said, "Then it's settled. Young master, go back and invite your master today. We will meet at Elder D's residence at noon tomorrow." "Okay." Ning Chen replied and then stood up, cupped his hands, and left. Li Yue bowed and left with him. On the way out of the palace, Li Yue's attitude was clearly much colder. It was not intentional, but it was involuntary. Ning Chen's calmness and experience gave her a misconception. It made her think that he was a young man who concealed his strength. She never expected that he was just an ordinary disciple sent by a Xiantian expert. This time, she had really misjudged him. What she did not understand was why Elder D had not mentioned anything about this person's master. Unknowingly, the 2 of them had already arrived at the princess residence. Ning Chen glanced at Li Yue and said, "Your Highness, let's part here. I will go and invite my master. Be careful on the way." Li Yue smiled gently and instructed. Ning Chen thanked her and then turned around and left. Li Yue walked into the princess residence and clapped her hands. A black figure appeared and respectfully knelt in front of her. "Go and keep an eye on that young man who was with me just now. See where he went. Be careful and don't give yourself away," Li Yue said coldly. "Yes," the black figure replied and disappeared. After taking a few steps on the street, Ning Chen immediately felt that someone was watching him. He did not need to think to know that it was someone sent by the eldest princess. After walking for a while, a new unfamiliar aura appeared. Ning Chen was helpless. It should be Duke Muyang's people this time. Fortunately, the eldest princess' residence was not too far from the Earth Craftsman Manor. Ning Chen did not want to have a conflict with Duke Muyang's people during the day, so he walked very quickly. Not long after, the Earth Craftsman Manor was in front of him. Ning Chen pushed open the door and walked in. In the courtyard, the old Earth Craftsman who was still forging looked up and then ignored him, continuing to forge his iron. "Hello, Big Brother Ning." The little boy was very polite, not forgetting to greet him while pulling the bellows. "Good little fish, I'll teach you a few moves in 2 days." Ning Chen smiled. "Thank you, Big Brother Ning." The little boy was extremely happy and grinned. It was an honor for a venerable to be willing to give him pointers. That's all. The earth craftsman patted the little boy. But this time, the little boy did not look at him with dissatisfaction. His little face was still smiling brightly like a flower. Senior earthly craftsman, the eldest princess and the emperor will be coming tomorrow. I've found an excuse to say that I have a Xiantian realm master. Please take it easy and don't let it slip. Little you, don't always smile. Don't forget, Ning Chen reminded her worriedly. It was better to have fewer people who knew about this matter. That eldest princess and the emperor were not easy to deal with. He really did not want to spend the effort to deal with them. All right. The little boy was the most cooperative and immediately nodded. That's your matter. I don't care. As long as you help me get back the blazing sun iron, it's fine. The earth craftsman slammed the hammer in his hand. Late at night, in the eldest princess residence, an urgent secret report was sent to Li Yue through a secret technique. When she opened it, her expression changed slightly. The contents of the report were shocking. A new 3-disaster expert had appeared in the 4 extremities. The disaster king had led people to surround and kill them, but the result was that he had been defeated. Of the 3 peak experts he had brought with him, 2 had died and 1 was injured. It was extremely miserable. When the disaster king had gone out, he had not concealed his aura in the slightest. That had drawn the attention of many Xiantian experts. That was why they had seen such a shocking battle. This matter had already spread through the southwest's large sections. It wouldn't be long before it spread here. Li Yue clenched her fist, crushing the secret report. The light in her eyes flickered unceasingly. This was truly a major matter. What did it mean for a new 3 calamities expert to appear? Chapter 234. At noon the next day, Li Yan and Li Yue appeared in the earthly craftsman manner in plain clothes. Beside them was an old man who had concealed his aura and was no different from an ordinary person. The little boy ran back and forth, serving tea and water by himself. He was extremely busy. The earthly craftsman stood in the courtyard and looked at the half-finished sword. He frowned and was somewhat dissatisfied. Just as everyone was waiting, the pressure in the world suddenly dropped and a vast aura appeared. It floated in the void and was surrounded by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It was hazy and powerful. Beside Li Yan, the old man's half-closed eyes suddenly opened. He stared at the figure in the void and couldn't help but be on guard. Your Majesty, eldest princess, I greet you. An ethereal voice rang out from the sky. Li Yan stood up and cupped his fists. Supremacy, you're too polite. May I know your title? Mortal. A word came from the void. Mortal. Li Yan muttered softly. He thought for a moment and was sure that he had never heard of this name. Beside him, Li Yue and the old man also shook their heads gently, indicating that they didn't know. The little boy wanted to laugh, but it was very difficult to hold it in. Soon, he felt that he couldn't hold it in anymore and hurriedly ran out. Come and work. The earthly craftsman glanced at the little boy and said. The little boy responded and ran to the bellows to continue working. However, he looked back from time to time and then quickly turned back. He wanted to laugh but couldn't. It was very difficult to hold it in. In the front hall, the 3 of them talked for a long time, but the figure in the void didn't appear. Li Yan didn't mind and wasn't surprised. Many Khanate experts in this world had strange habits and didn't want to appear. He didn't care about these trivial matters. What he needed to confirm was that such an expert really existed and was strong enough. The old man beside him secretly said a few words to Li Yan through voice transmission. Only then did Li Yan nod in relief. An expert who had surpassed the 2nd tribulation of the Khanate stage and was close to the 3rd tribulation was enough. In the world, most Khanate experts were generally stuck at the first tribulation of the Khanate stage. There were not many who had undergone the second tribulation and above, and even fewer who had undergone the third tribulation. In the hall, the three of them conversed for an entire afternoon. In the end, Li Yan left with Li Yuwei and the old man in satisfaction. After the emperor left, the little boy finally couldn't take it anymore. He stopped pulling the bellows and ran back into the front hall, laughing heartlessly. The void swirled and Ning Chen walked out. Looking at the little fellow who was about to burst out laughing, he helplessly stroked his head. Big brother Ning, you promised to teach me 2 moves. The little boy stopped laughing with great difficulty, and said with an eager look on his face. What do you want to learn? Ning Chen asked. Sword. The little boy rolled his big eyes and said excitedly. Ning Chen laughed softly. This little guy was quite smart. Seeing that he had come to ask for a sword, he asked to learn the sword. Senior earthly blacksmith, I'll lend you another sword. Ning Chen walked out of the front hall and looked at the old earthly blacksmith who was in the middle of tempering his sword. Get it yourself. The craftsman waved his hand impatiently. Ning Chen glanced at the row of weapons in the hall. With a wave of his hand, a 3-foot-long sword flew out. The sword had no blade, and the tip was blunt. Little you, look carefully. Ning Chen casually extended the sword in front of him, then tossed it in front of the little fellow. Go ahead and practice. The little boy's mouth curled up in dissatisfaction. This was too much of a trick, bullying a child. Boom. At this moment, the very small part of the courtyard in front of him began to crack open. When the little fellow heard the sound and looked over, it collapsed with a loud bang. The little boy was dumbfounded. What was going on? I don't have money. Seeing the old earthly blacksmith look over, Ning Chen very consciously said. Little you, your monthly allowance for this year will be halved. The craftsman turned his gaze to the little boy and said indifferently. The little fellow recovered from his shock. His little face was bitter. He didn't have much monthly allowance to begin with, and with this deduction, he didn't even have money to buy new clothes. Ning Chen more or less rejoiced in his misfortune. He didn't feel any guilt as the main culprit. Train well. I'll go out for a walk. Perhaps I'll find a place to fight. With that, Ning Chen's figure suddenly disappeared without a trace. The little boy raised the sword in front of him and swung it just like Ning Chen had. Looking at the completely still wall, he couldn't help but curl his lips. The teachings of an expert were just like the legends. What the little boy didn't know was that Ning Chen had the same feeling as him. Whether it was Jian Consecrator, Yan Qin Wang, or Mu Bai, they all just swung their swords without explaining anything. At the beginning, Ning Chen didn't understand. Later on, he learned that some principles had to be comprehended by oneself. The true meaning of the sword was fast, accurate, and focused. It wasn't a difficult principle to understand. However, there were very few people in the world who could truly do it. Only when you swung your sword enough times would your sword cultivation increase accordingly. Of course, the number of times varied from person to person. The most legendary person was Grand Xia's Yan Qin Wang. He had studied the sword for 27 years, and his sword path was naturally formed. The most stunning person was Desolate City's sword. He had been obsessed with the sword his entire life. His comprehension of the sword was unparalleled under the heavens. He could ignore the barriers of the martial path. On this path, the accomplishments of the two of them had long since looked down upon the world, and they had left others far behind. The Black Rock Sea was peaceful under the moonlight. 10 miles away, Ning Chen wielded the cyan ink sword in his hand. From 10 miles away, he waved his sword and immediately turned around to run. In the next moment, 2 furious roars rang out. 2 figures soared into the air, chasing after him. In just a moment, the 3 of them had already lost track of how many miles they had chased. The two Sacred Lands experts hesitated as they chased. They didn't dare to go all out, worried that this was a trick to lure the tiger away from the mountain. The two of them quickly stopped chasing and returned to the Blackstone Sea. Ning Chen also returned. His sword danced in the Blackstone Sea's direction, creating a wild gale. The two Sacred Lands experts couldn't hold back their fury. They once more flew out, chasing after him with all their might. Ning Chen had long since been prepared. Before the two of them could chase after him, he had already disappeared without a trace. After chasing for 700 miles, the two Sacred Lands experts paused for a moment before returning. Then, Ning Chen came again. Sword light rained down from the sky above the Blackstone Sea, creating a miserable scene of dust and sand everywhere. You go kill him. I'll guard here. Okay. The figure that soared into the sky was filled with murderous intent as he quickly flew away. A wisp of an icy cold arc flashed past the corners of Ning Chen's mouth as he swiftly left. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. In the wilderness, the two of them sped past each other, one in front and one behind. The chase was extremely intense. Once they were far enough away, Ning Chen stopped and turned to face the Sacred Lands experts. His figure flashed, and his sword swept out. With a loud clang, the sword and saber collided. Dust and sand rose up, covering the two figures. Ha! Go Yuan roared furiously. His saber pressed forward, adding some ruthlessness. Ning Chen swung his sword, pushing the former away. He stepped forward, and his sword swept out again. In a battle of speed against strength, the saber and sword constantly clashed. Sparks flew everywhere. The sword in Ning Chen's hand glowed brighter and brighter. His figure was like an illusion. In the blink of an eye, several afterimages were destroyed. Expert. The killing intent in Go Yuan's eyes grew even stronger. His saber was as heavy as a mountain, capable of splitting mountains. Earth Scroll, 1000 Earth Revolutions. With a wave of his hand, the Earth Scroll appeared once more. The ground shook, and large chunks of earth flew towards the center, trapping the Sacred Lands experts. Go Yuan's eyes turned cold. His saber danced in the air, and saber light flew out, shattering the earth and rocks around him. However, a sword appeared in front of him amidst the sandstorm. It was silent, like the Grim Reaper's scythe. Go Yuan's body trembled, and his saber blocked in front of him. An instant later, his saber broke, and his soul returned. Ning Chen didn't stop. He quickly rushed in the direction of the Blackstone Sea. When he arrived, he charged straight in. Two green jade trees were quietly growing in the Blackstone Sea. A black-robed expert was guarding them. When he saw the figure that appeared, his killing intent surged like the sea. Go Yuan hadn't returned, but this person had. There was no suspense about the result. He hadn't expected that Go Yuan would be the one to be defeated. This young expert had surprised him. Ning Chen's expression was also very serious. This person in front of him was the real trouble. An expert infinitely close to the third tribulation of the Xiantian realm was a big challenge for him. Yuan Shao waved his hand and set up a restriction around the two green jade trees. Then, he clenched his hands, and a pair of golden and silver swords flew out from behind him and landed in his hands. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. Mother-child swords. He had met many experts who used swords, but this was the first time he met someone who used mother-child swords. This fight wouldn't be easy. He took a step and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Ning Chen. Ning Chen attacked first, wanting to personally test the mysteries of the alphabet sword. With a loud bang, countless black rocks flew up around the two of them. They were instantly cut into pieces by the sword wills that spread out in all directions. The moment the swords clashed, the golden short sword streaked across the air. It took a small risk and went for Ning Chen's throat. Ning Chen hurriedly retreated, and his black hair fell to the ground in front of him. Yuan Zhao's feet moved, and the silver sword slashed out with a sharp edge, creating a dazzling radiance. Ning Chen's ink-green sword blocked the silver sword's edge. The moment the two of them clashed, another dazzling radiance appeared, aiming for a vital point. With a tearing sound, his clothes were torn apart, and the sword wind brought out a bloody wound. It was extremely dangerous. Ning Chen's right hand touched his chest. A silver radiance flashed, and the wound quickly froze. Again. Ning Chen waved his left hand, and frost surged. A waterfall of wind and snow rapidly gathered, and in the blink of an eye, a snow-colored sword appeared. He rarely used dual swords, but that didn't mean he didn't know how to use them. He had followed his senior for so long, and he had to learn some things. Imitating someone else's footsteps, how foolish. Yuan Shao sneered, and once again pressed forward. The long sword chased after the soul, and the short sword took the life. Ning Chen's cyan ink long sword blocked the attack of the silver long sword. When the short sword was about to take his life, Ning Chen didn't dodge, and the snow-colored sword in his hand directly swept out. As the saying went, an inch shorter, an inch more dangerous. However, there was another saying, an inch longer, an inch more powerful. The long sword and the short sword competed between life and death. In the next moment, the winner would live, and the loser would die. Chapter 235. The snow sword gathered the cold chi, adding another 3 inches of cold edge. In a battle of swords, there was no winner or loser, only life or death. The golden sword light was flexible and fast. However, the snow sword was not a battle of swords, it was a battle of life and death. The 3 feet and 3 inches of sword light entered the body first, breaking the meridians and bones. It was extremely ear-piercing. The golden sword light arrived at the same time. Ning Chen used the sword as the axis, borrowing the force to spin. In an instant, the 3 feet distance was like the difference between heaven and earth. The disadvantage of the short sword was obvious. Blood ice mixed with broken bones flew out. At the most critical moment, Yuan Shao turned his short sword around and cut the snow sword in half. His body flashed quickly, retreating before the door of death. Is it that easy? Ning Chen waved his hand, and the snow sword that was cut in the former's body exploded. Blood spurted out. In the rain of blood, a huge hole appeared on Yuan Zhao's left chest. The white bones were exposed, and even the beating of his heart could be faintly seen. Eh! A painful groan was heard. The black battle suit was bleeding like rain. It was extremely miserable. Ning Chen moved his body and moved forward again. The green ink sword shone brightly as it danced several times in a row. Yuan Shao tried to block the attack, but his body was heavily injured. His moves were restricted. For the first time since the battle started, he was at a disadvantage. Ning Chen did not use the 2 swords for the second time. He used the long sword to deal with the sharp letters. When the swords collided, he immediately moved away without any delay. The clanging sounds of swords clashing against each other rang out incessantly under the night sky. Sparks flew in all directions, and the remnants of the battle vibrated. One move decided the winner. After losing the first move, Yuan Shao was in a very strange situation. Facing the endless sword light of the green ink sword, he had no choice but to switch from offense to defense. Right at this moment, a black light flew out of Yuan Zhao's sleeve, turning into a deadly light and rushing toward the person in front of him. Ning Chen's body shivered. He subconsciously leaned to the side. The sword light brushed past his left shoulder and right arm, bringing out 2 streams of black and red blood. The extremely poisonous dark feather was extremely poisonous. Although it had just brushed past his shoulder, the poison still spread quickly. Your man is already dead. Ning Chen was furious. His left shoulder was quickly frozen. The next moment, the dark yellow light around him shone brightly, dyeing the entire sky into the color of the earth. Earth scroll, earth destruction and mountains destruction. The earth shook violently. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of yellow sword lights flew out from the ground and soared into the sky. The sword rain was like a heaven-defying torrent, shocking the world. Yuan Shao was greatly shaken. He endured his injuries and shifted his feet, dodging again and again. However, the sword rain that flew backwards was untraceable and disorderly. In the blink of an eye, it had already dyed the yellow earth red with blood. Ning Chen's figure moved in a flash. His green ink was stained with frost. His sword of innocence took away the soul. Green frost flashed past the sword, and blood filled the sky. Blood gushed out high into the air, dyeing the night sky red. It was bleak and glaring. Unwillingness and regret were all too late. Yuan Shao fell to the ground, his eyes filled with hatred and resentment as he left. Ning Chen waved his hand and the earth rumbled, burying all the figures on the ground and the traces of the battle under the yellow soil. Around the green jade wood, the restrictions that had been temporarily set up were no longer maintained by its owner. With a loud bang, they shattered and dissipated from the world. Ning Chen walked forward and activated the life scroll with a flip of his hand. The spiritual chi of the world stirred, and the two green jade wood slowly rose up. Afterwards, they turned into a wisp of green light and disappeared into his sleeve. Now that he had achieved his goal, Ning Chen did not stay any longer. With a flash, he quickly left. The sky gradually brightened, and a white figure appeared in the earthly craftsman manner. When the little boy who had woken up early to practice his sword saw Ning Chen in such a sorry state, he was shocked and hurried over to support him. "Big brother Ning, what's wrong?" the little boy asked worriedly. "I'm fine. I fought with someone and got a few injuries. I'll be fine in a while." Ning Chen patted the little boy's head tiredly. "I'll help you back to your room to rest," said the little boy. "All right." Ning Chen did not refuse. He was supported by Xiao Yu to the back courtyard. The little boy brought Ning Chen back to his room and did not dare disturb him again. He carefully retreated. "Don't worry. His life is tougher than anyone else's," said the earthly craftsman indifferently as he walked past. The little boy nodded. The worry in his eyes was still clearly visible. Big brother Ning was so powerful. Who could injure him to such an extent? Inside the room, Ning Chen circulated his body. A silver brilliance rose, driving the surrounding spiritual chi to continuously cleanse the poison on his body. The Tarsus poison continuously corroded his left shoulder. Black bubbles rolled and rolled into his flesh and bones. Every time a little was removed, it would cause a terrifying pain that reached deep into his bones. Ugh! There was a long painful groan. Chi waves shook the room. The black poison dripped onto the floor bit by bit along with his clothes. The sizzling sound of corrosion did not stop. Not long after, the area in front of him was a mess. The little boy trembled with fear as he listened outside the door. Even the earthly craftsman could not help but frown. It seemed that this kid's injuries were not light. The eldest princess has arrived. At this moment, a loud announcement came from outside the front hall. The little boy's expression immediately changed. He looked at his master at a loss. Big brother Ning had said that he had to hide his identity from the princess first. "What are you panicking for? Follow me to the front hall." The earthly craftsman scolded, then turned and walked towards the front hall. The little boy quickly followed. Before he left, he looked at the room worriedly, his eyes filled with worry. In the front hall, Li Yue, who was dressed in a gorgeous dress, was waiting quietly. There was a faint smile on her charming face from beginning to end. The little boy was still in charge of serving tea. There were pitifully few people in the earthly craftsman manor. Other than 3 to 5 guards given by the royal family to look after the house, everything else was done by Xiao Yu. Little boy, where's your big brother Ning? Li Yue smiled at Xiao Yu and asked. He's changing his clothes. The little boy was quick-witted and answered. The earthly craftsman never liked these things. He continued to tidy up his pile of metal lumps and turned a deaf ear to what was going on in the hall. He let Xiao Yu deal with it however she wanted. Cup after cup of tea. The little boy was very diligent, afraid that Li Yue's cup would be empty. After drinking 3 cups of tea, Li Yue began to have some doubts. She looked at the little boy and smiled. Xiao Yu, tell me the truth. Where did your big brother Ning go? The little boy was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. He put down the teapot and said, Your Highness, don't be anxious. I'll go and rush him. With that, the little boy turned and ran towards the backyard. Li Yue drank the tea in her cup and a thoughtful look flashed through her eyes. No matter how she looked at it, something was wrong. This little boy was not good at lying. There were too many loopholes. Ning Chen was either not in the manor or something had happened to him. In the backyard, the little boy paced around in front of Ning Chen's door anxiously. However, he did not dare to knock on the door and disturb him. A moment later, Li Yue walked over slowly. She looked at the little boy who was pacing in front of the door and looked at the room behind him. She scanned with her spirit consciousness. Just as she was about to see what was going on, the door creaked open and a young figure walked out with a gentle smile on his face. I'm sorry to have made you wait, Your Highness. It's fine. Li Yue narrowed her eyes and looked at the former. Something was wrong. Ning Chen walked up and pinched Xiao Yu's cheeks. This little fellow was quite clever and had helped him stall for quite a bit of time. The little boy grinned and then secretly wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. He had been scared to death. Li Yue carefully observed him. After a long time, she finally saw what was wrong. The current Ning Chen gave people an illusory and distant feeling. It was too unreal. Perhaps Ning Chen had been too careless. After going through 2 big battles and using all his strength to force out the poison, he was unable to completely conceal his aura. That was why he did not feel like his usual self. Xiao Yu, it seems your big brother Ning's clothes are pretty much tattered. No matter how you change them, they're still tattered. Li Yue looked at Ning Chen's tattered clothes and chuckled. There was a hidden meaning in her words. The little boy's face reddened and he lowered his head in embarrassment. Ning Chen looked at the tattered parts of his clothes and felt helpless. He could use his true qi to shake off the blood and dirt, but there was nothing he could do about the tattered parts. Xiao Yu, go get a needle and thread. I'll mend your big brother Ning's clothes, said Li Yue. Yes. Surprise flashed across the little boy's face, but he still obediently nodded and quickly ran to a nearby room. Ning Chen did not want Li Yue to see the abnormality in his room. He extended his hand and politely said, Your Highness, let's go to the front hall. Yes. Li Yue nodded and turned to walk to the front hall. In the front hall, the 2 of them walked over and sat on either side of the tea table. The little boy also ran back and handed the needle and thread to Li Yue. Young master, take off your outer clothes, said Li Yue softly. Ning Chen hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still took off his outermost clothes and handed them over. Thank you, Your Highness. Ning Chen sincerely thanked her. It's nothing. Li Yue smiled and took the clothes. No matter what, this person was someone she wanted to rope in. Furthermore, just now, she once again felt that she might have really underestimated this young man. The sword qi on his clothes had already been dispelled, but Li Yue could still tell that it was caused by a sword. When she saw the same tears on his clothes, she more or less understood what had happened. Since Ning Chen didn't say anything, Li Yue didn't ask. Asking too much would only increase the distance between them. There was no need for that. If she wanted to know something, her subordinates would investigate it for her. As long as it was in the Lihua dynasty, there were very few things that could escape her eyes. "Young master, have you heard of a matter? A few days ago, a sword user appeared in the southwest," said Li Yue. Bang! The teacup that Ning Chen had just picked up shattered. The tea splashed all over his body, and the broken pieces cut his palm, causing blood to gush out. Li Yue raised her head and saw the unconcealable shock in Ning Chen's eyes. She frowned slightly. "Young master, be careful." Li Yue put down the clothes in her hand and walked forward. She took out a silk handkerchief and wiped the tea and blood off his hand before carefully bandaging the wound. "Princess, please continue." Ning Chen suppressed the fluctuations in his heart. Chapter 236. To Ning Chen, the appearance of a third expert from the three disasters was the most terrifying news. In order to prevent the appearance of a third expert, he even wanted to kill Meng Xuanji, who he didn't have much enmity with. The location of the Ascension Valley was the place where the boundary between the two realms was the weakest. Only three disaster-level powerhouses were needed to open a passage. There were currently 2 experts in the 4 realms. One was the Master of the 4 Realms, and the other was the Master of the Longevity Hall. If a third one really appeared, it would be a disaster for the Divine Continent. Li Yue was surprised by the former's reaction, but she continued. There was no information about this person in the 4 realms. He seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. He was dressed in luxurious green robes, and his face was young and handsome. Behind him was a 17 or 18-year-old girl. There was a sword rack on his back, and there were at least 5 swords on it, each one different. Just 2 nights ago, the Disaster King and 3 peerless experts worked together to kill this person in the Southwest Territory. In the end, they suffered a crushing defeat, and the Disaster King was injured. Of the other 3, 2 died and 1 was injured. Li Yue turned around and was surprised to find that Ning Chen had stood up at some point. His face was filled with shock, and it was even more intense than before. "Your Highness, I have to leave first." "My apologies." Ning Chen took the clothes that hadn't been mended and quickly walked out. The little boy was at a loss when he saw the Princess Royal's gaze, but he didn't know how to explain. Outside the front hall, the Earth Craftsman sighed softly. He walked into the hall and said, "Your Highness, please go back. I'll have him visit the Princess Royal's residence another day." The craftsman didn't say anything else. This matter needed Ning Chen to come back and personally resolve it. Li Yue nodded and left with a grave expression. This Sir Ning's reaction to what had happened in the Southwest Territory was too strong. Li Yue returned to her residence with a heart full of questions. Today's events were unusual, and she needed to properly sort them out. At night, a report was sent to the princess residence. Li Yue's expression changed again after reading it. The Black Stone Sea was destroyed, and the last 2 plants had been stolen. Even the experts guarding the sacred land had perished. Li Yue immediately thought of the many sword and saber wounds on Ning Chen's clothes, and a trace of doubt flashed through her eyes. However, there was something that didn't make sense. This young Master Ning was obviously only a 5th-grade prenatal stage cultivator, and couldn't be faked. Li Yue leaned against the back of the chair and closed her eyes. The questions in her heart became more and more difficult to answer. What did she not think of? She kept feeling that she had overlooked the most important point. In the Southwestern Territory, a white figure sped along, constantly searching for traces of the great battle that had taken place that day. Ning Chen's footsteps never stopped. He was extremely anxious. Senior and a man had come. No wonder he had such a strong feeling the night before. A man must have been affected by the battle and was injured. Ning Chen searched back and forth in the wilderness. Finally, when it was past midnight, he found a piece of land that was destroyed and riddled with holes. There wasn't a single spot on the ground that was still intact. All that could be seen was a scene of devastation. Ning Chen walked on the ground and felt the sword intent that hadn't dissipated yet. His last bit of doubt disappeared. The vast wilderness was boundless. Ning Chen looked left and right, his eyes filled with confusion. He didn't know where he should go. At this moment, the earth trembled as a dark golden heavy sword slowly rose from the ground and landed in front of Ning Chen. Shiga. Ning Chen's heart sank as he looked at that familiar ancient sword. He knew that Senior had left it for him. In other words, Senior still had some matters to attend to and couldn't leave. He had told him to take care of himself. Ning Chen walked up and pulled out Jiga. He tore a strip of cloth from his robes and wrapped it around it. Then he placed it on his back and left. He had always been worried that something had happened to a man. But now he could relax. With Senior by his side, a man wouldn't be in any danger. Before he could see Senior and a man, he had his own matters to attend to. He couldn't just keep waiting. Within the earthly craftsman manor, the earthly craftsman wasn't forging in front of his furnace. Instead, he was calmly waiting for Ning Chen to return. When the sun shone down from the east, the spiritual qi in the air swirled in the front yard. A silhouette in plain clothes walked out and returned to the residence. The eldest princess sent news that the blazing sun iron has been found. The earthly craftsman gravely reported. Where is it? Asked Ning Chen. The Sudden Lightning Dynasty's Xianling Pavilion, replied the earthly craftsman. Ning Chen frowned. He seemed to have seen that name before. When he was in the continent of the Nine Clouds, he had seen records of the Sudden Thunder Dynasty's several large powers. The Xianling Pavilion was one of them. But at that time, he had only glanced over it hastily and hadn't studied it carefully. The eldest princess will tell you the details later. You should prepare yourself. The princess's manor will soon send someone else, continued the earthly craftsman. Yes. Ning Chen nodded and walked to the rear courtyard. As expected, not long after, the eldest princess once more sent someone to invite him. Ning Chen quickly tidied himself up and left the earthly craftsman manor with 2 swords on his back. Within the eldest princess's manor, Li Yue was dressed in casual robes. Her hair was tied up simply, and she had removed her extravagant hair ornaments. Ning Chen walked over. Looking at Li Yue's outfit, he frowned. She was going too. Let's go. We can talk on the way, said Li Yue. I can go by myself. Princess, you don't need to go on a long journey with me, said Ning Chen. If he went alone, he could quickly reach the Sudden Thunder Dynasty. If Li Yue wanted to go with him, they would have to waste a lot of time on the road. It's a bit troublesome. Besides, I have other things to do in the Sudden Thunder Dynasty. Let's go. I'll tell you the details on the way, said Li Yue before quickly walking away. When Ning Chen saw that, he sighed inwardly. He could only follow her and hope that this trip would go smoothly. Not long after, an ordinary-looking carriage rushed out of the royal city and headed towards the south at high speed. The 4 dynasties of the 4 extremes. To the north is Clear Water, to the south is Sudden Thunder, to the west is Changfeng, and to the east is Lihua. The Lihua dynasty is called the first dynasty because of the existence of the Holy Land. In reality, the Sudden Thunder dynasty is the strongest of the 4 dynasties. Our target this time is the Xianling Pavilion. It was founded by a member of the Sudden Thunder dynasty's royal family. After 200 years, no one knows how many experts they have. However, the Xianling Pavilion is a pavilion. Normally, they only talk about business and don't care about anything else. The news of the blazing sun iron was intentionally released by the Xianling Pavilion. Other than that, there are also several other treasures of the same level or even more precious. This news was released 2 days ago. There should be many people moving out by now. Our goal is just the blazing sun iron. As for the other things, we won't fight over them for now. Li Yue quickly explained the situation. This time, their mission was extremely difficult. If too many people knew about this, it would be very disadvantageous for them. Understood. Ning Chen nodded. When can the mortal sovereign come? Asked Li Yue. I have the mark my master left on me. I can catch up at any time, replied Ning Chen. Li Yue relaxed a bit. With a powerful Xiantian overseeing them, the situation would be much better. This time, the Xianling Pavilion had released these treasures in such a high-profile manner. It would definitely attract countless experts, especially heavenly blacksmiths. They would very likely borrow the power of the Holy Lands to fight for these treasures. The carriage rumbled through the wilderness. In order to not attract attention and save time, Li Yue did not choose to take the official road. Instead, she went southwest. In the blink of an eye, another half a year had passed. He wondered if little Mingyu was more obedient now. Was she still as naughty as before? The aroma of the fish gradually drifted out, spreading in the dark night with the breeze. It was so alluring. At this moment, a fair hand reached out. Ning Chen raised his head and was stunned. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.